many places. People have come from Amman, Jordan, Beirut, Lebanon, New York, Boston, Toledo, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Louisiana, Missouri, Oklahoma, Ohio, Alabama, and Georgia. I'm surprised with the diversity of people who have taken the time to come here for this event. We have a very special speaker who has come from Canada to speak today, an international and renowned motivational speaker who will grace us right before lunch, and he will share with us a very interesting talk. He's well known, he has traveled around the globe speaking about health, and he's going to speak to us about physicians, heal thyself. On behalf of my co-chairs, Dr. Samih Labib, Dr. Javad Khalid, and Dr. Ahmad Sabbar, I really want to welcome you. I want to welcome the attendees who are here, and I particularly want to welcome the most important participants, the future leaders of healthcare, the students, the pre-med students, the residents, and the learners who will be our leaders 10 years from now and 20 years from now. They are our mission, and they are the most important people, in my humble judgment, in this room. Dr. Bowden, welcome. You may come forward and join us if you wish. One outcomes coming out of this meeting. I'm very excited to share with you that several of my medical students and residents, with all due respect to the distinguished senior faculty here, will probably have the most influential presentation today, because it's their future and they have the responsibility of creating their future, and they have plans to share with us. We will hear updates today on simulation technologies as it relates to surgical education, and we have true world leaders in this field. We'll hear from learners who will transition from being learners to learner educators, how they themselves will step up from being passive learners to becoming active educators. We'll hear from one of my brilliant medical students and young residents on how can we address issues that come from Washington, D.C. and law and policy, and changes that have impacted our education and learning process, and how can we react and relate to that. They will share with us their thoughts. Another of my mentees will talk to us about creating institutional scholars virtual portal, so that senior educators will remain in contact amongst themselves and with the young people who are aspiring to become leaders. As I'm about to close my part, I wish to thank all the supporters and sponsors who have made this event possible. I thank Emory University for giving us the facility, and many of the faculty who have contributed to this. I thank the United Community Alliance, UBeyond Mentorship, National Arab American Medical Association USA, NAMA Georgia, the Labib Family Charitable Foundation, and Mr. Muhammad Farid Khamis. I would be remiss if I did not express my gratitude and appreciation to two people who have been critical to today's events, but they had to travel out of town, and I hope they are seeing us through this broadcast. Ms. Dana Haddad and Dr. Humam Salahiyya, who have been influential in organizing a lot of the work. Many of the volunteers here have done a great job, and I thank them and I appreciate them. I want to recognize one young man in particular, who's standing there in the corner. is an Emory College student, Abdullah Lavey. He has been a webmaster, the art worker. He has done all of the artwork in webmaster and websites for us. If this conference is successful, you will have contributed a lot to it. If it's not, it's my neighbor. At this point, allow me to introduce my co-chair, Professor Sam Khalid, who will welcome you and share additional important information. Thank you very much for being here and welcome to Emory University.
Good morning, everyone. Like Omar said, it is our pleasure to welcome leaders and experts into this room. Many faces I recognize and many new faces that I'd like to know more. When Omar came up with the idea almost a year ago, we talked about a forum for exchange of ideas, a network of thoughtful professionals together looking to the future and learning from each other. So I hope that is achievable today. Housekeeping notes. For our speakers, we are honored to have you. Please stay on time. We allot 8 minutes per address. And when you have 1 minute remaining, Laura, who is our lovely organizer, will come stand close to the podium with a sign that says 1 minute remaining.
Or else.
It shows that we care about the time of others, and give time to other speakers. The other issue is, please silence your cell phones if you don't mind. And if you receive a phone call that you would like to answer, please take it outside and answer it. Do not engage in a conversation during the meeting. Also, do not engage in side conversations, because we're all here together to have an uninterrupted conversation. As far as the speakers, we have approximately 4 speakers per session, followed by a question and answer time that will be approximately 20 to 23 minutes. Those who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Our ushers will come, bring you the microphone. Please be brief and make it a question, not necessarily a long comment, if you can do so. And then we were going to have lunch, and at lunch we'll have time to sit and also network and enjoy each other's company. So without further ado, we are to start the symposium 1, right?
If the first session speakers don't mind coming up to the front for me, please.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Alan Pickens. I'm a thoracic surgeon here at Emory. I want to once again thank the organizers of this wonderful summit. It is a much needed experience. We're going to begin with the initial session 1, the changing state of global health. I will be moderating. Michael J. Parker will be on our presentation. Keith Delman, Munir Nazel, and Marette Wagstaff as well. I'm going to give each of our presenters an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll begin with our first presentation by Dr. Parker.
Great. So I'm Michael Parker. I will sacrifice to the audio gods here. I'm Associate Dean for Online Learning at Harvard Medical School. I'm one of the faculty there. I started up and direct the HMX program.
I'm Keith Delman. I am the Vice Chair for Education and the Program Director of the General Surgery Residency. I'm also the Director of the Center for Surgical Anatomy and Technique, which is a entity that actually has created some of the things we'll show you during my talk.
I am Munir Nizal, the Vice Chair of Surgery Education and Research, also the Division of Surgical Education. In addition, I have the hat of being in charge of the surgery simulation at the University of Toledo.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Sharon Meert-Wagstaff. I'm Associate Professor of Surgery here at Emory. I am Director of High Fidelity Simulation for the Center for Surgical Anatomy and Technique, and Director of the Excel Simulation Center for our School of Medicine.
All right, Dr. Parker, you're on the stage. It's my pleasure today. My pleasure today to be able to tell you about the HMX online learning program from Harvard Medical School. So I want you to at least leave here with two big ideas. One is that the ability to bring unique online preclinical medical education to the world at scale is transformative. And we're seeing many schools around the world facing the same issues with preparing their students for success. So it's a common need. The second is that use of learning science, so what we know about how people learn now, particularly online, plus data science, so this incredible stream of data that is coming from online learning. Those two things together can really help us optimize learning. So this is the classic picture of what we are coming from with preclinical medical education. Typical lectures, this is at Harvard Medical School, and the idea is not so much to replace face-to-face as to figure out how to augment that and shift the conversation so that we can have higher level discussions when we're in the classroom. So how do we prepare students to be able to have those types of case discussions? So we're thinking about things like injecting clinical relevance into the material. And so this is an example taken from one of the HMX courses, HMX Pharmacology. We're in the operating room at the Brigham watching how anesthesia is administered during a surgery to learn about pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So what better illustration for students very early on. So we're taking it out of the realm of the textbook, basically, and bringing it into the clinic. So let me back up for a second and just tell you what HMX is. So fully online courses that are targeted at foundational medical science topics. So we're talking genetics, immunology, pharmacology, physiology, biochemistry, and we continue to build out these courses. And targeted at student preparation. So we're typically talking either pre-matriculation, which means before students start medical school, or internationally, often that's the first, second, or third year in 6-year programs. And this started up 4 years ago, so I founded this about 4.5 years ago and have grown a team since then. It's been used at Harvard Medical School since then. It's been used elsewhere in the world for the last 3 years. Why did we start this? So one aspect was variable preparation of students. Very typical example, we'd see a biochemistry major sitting next to a political science major during the first year of medical school, both with incredible smarts, but one might struggle more than the other. A continued need for integration of basic science and clinical medicine. How do we bring these two together? And then lack of really useful data early in students' learning about how they actually think about learning. Not just their performance, but how do people learn? So the hallmarks of HMX, one that I've mentioned already is clinical applications. So we're not just in the operating room, we're in the dialysis unit as shown here, talking about movement of body fluids. We're in the cath lab, we're in the pulmonary function testing lab, we're in the exercise testing lab, we're in the hospital room, we're in the clinic. So we film constantly in these different places and bring those and tie those to basic science. Second is biomedical visualization. So I'm very fortunate to have a team of medicine-specific illustrators, animators, video production people who we can work on designing beautiful visualizations and interactivity with to bring those into the courses as well.
And then a piece I'm not showing, but that's very important, is assessment. So how do we understand students' learning? How do we help them gauge their own learning? So a very strong assessment strategy. And this is now being used around the world. So a few examples here ranges from UCLA, making these courses required for their students, to KKU in Thailand, to La Salle in Mexico, to Egypt, and so forth. So it's being used in probably about 20 institutions at this point around the world. And we're looking at outcomes. So we want to understand, does this work for people? And so we measure learning gains as we across every cohort. And so not to go deeply into this graph, but the lighter bars are essentially the challenge that the scores that students are coming into the courses with. The darker bars are where they end up. This is divided by quartile after they've learned in the courses. And we see a very robust effect that students are coming up to a high, consistent level after going through these courses. And this is by no means the only data that we're collecting. So I was mentioning this incredible stream of data. So navigation events, time spent, video viewing, exactly how are they behaving as they learn. This is just one example. We can get second-by-second data on how students are watching these videos. So this is video viewing data. Each line or bar is one student view of a video. Deeper shades are rewatches of those portions of the material. So we can look, for example, very simple example here, but where are students confused? Where are they engaged? And we can feed this forward to teachers to say, where should you spend more or less time as you get into the classroom? But there's just a wealth of data beyond this. This is just a simple example. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention that other parts of the healthcare ecosystem are also looking at these courses. So we found a common need in pharma and biotech and in tech and healthcare. Companies like Google, we've had hundreds of learners going through. Other companies, Amazon, Genentech, and so forth. So we work with company groups who are interested in things like immuno-oncology or have genetics related concerns for the future. So it turns out to be a broader need in this case. And then just to conclude, again, to leave you with this thought that we're leveraging learning science, this idea of what we know about cognitive and behavioral performance, and data science, this incredible stream of data that is well beyond the actual content of the courses to really begin to optimize learning for people. I'll conclude with that. I don't think I got the 1 minute.
You're good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Parker, for a wonderful presentation. For the sake of keeping us on time, we're going to hold questions until the end. So if you would, just jot down your questions, and we will allow time at the end of the session to have those questions presented to each speaker. Dr. Gelman is up next.
So we're going to switch from foundational education to a more refined end of the educational spectrum, where we are tailoring education to a discipline in particular. My role is largely in educating individuals who've chosen the discipline of surgery into those people that can actually perform surgery independently. I have no disclosures. And this talk is actually in 8 minutes, 2 one-hour talks combined. One is on the digital platforms to enhance education. The other is a favorite topic of mine entitled Safe and Prudent Speed, which is actually a reference to autonomy in surgical training, which is a subject that has really hit the forefront of surgical education, because with new guidelines and restrictions on the way we train, we've actually lost the opportunity to have independent autonomy in the operating room, which is critical to the transition of a practitioner to independent practice and caring for patients on their own, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. So the title Safe and Prudent Speed actually comes from the United States Coast Guard federal regulations. In another lifetime, I was a commercial captain, and one of my favorite rules is one that I actually use whenever I'm talking to residents, and that's that the idea that as a captain, you have to travel at a safe and prudent speed, which is defined as a speed in which you cannot get into an accident. So by definition, if something bad happens, it's automatically everyone's fault. And the reason why that exists is because we're trying to avoid this, or this, or more recently this, and everybody has heard about this in the news a few years ago when two United States Navy ships several weeks apart ended up in accidents in commercial shipping lanes. That should be avoidable. Similarly, when you're training an individual, you never want to have a bad outcome or an event happen that was a result of either bad decision making on the trainee or bad decision making on the part of the supervising physician. And so these push-pulls are what lead us to how we have limited the autonomy available to trainees, and that actually will arguably limit the ability of a trainee to go out into independent practice. As such, we've needed to create adjuncts and different models to actually return to that particular time when we can allow that autonomy safely for patients. So we're going to talk briefly today about three concepts: some novel digital platforms, the role for those platforms in surgery, and the interface of those platforms with autonomy. So as I noted, basically there is the fact that educators are pulled in different directions. Right? We're torn by our responsibility to educate and our concerns about safety and outcomes of our patients and our operations themselves, right? So we basically have the passion to teach balanced with our compassion for our patients, the fact that we're committed to our outcomes, we have a meticulous attention to detail and, of course, habit. Some of the individuals in this room have been practicing surgery for longer than some of the people in the room are alive. And we also have this responsibility towards safety and billing, because at the end of the day, someone's got to keep the lights on. And so one of the things I teach my trainees is never put a sound effect in a talk, because you never know how it's going to sound. But we'll see if I can do this or not. This is a violation of my own principles, but my bet is it won't work. And so the big question is, when I started in residency, my parents bought me this device. And they also said to my wife and I, we're going to pay for your internet. And my internet at that time was a 36K high-end dial-up service. That's not that long ago, right? But it's 25 years ago, and what has transpired since then is this incredible explosion of digital availability. Now, that internet is available on my wife's watch, right? And so we go from dial-up service to internet that's now 5G, and it changes the way we deliver information. The idea of memorizing things, the idea of having checklists is a transformative concept. But in fact, this information is available to you at the touch of a button or in your head, literally like through a Bluetooth in your ear. And so this is the way children hang out now. They talk to each other while standing next to each other via text. And I know this because I have a 19-year-old and a 15-year-old, neither of whom can actually come downstairs to talk to me. It all goes, they text me from upstairs in their room. Okay? And so how do we capture those individuals, and how do we educate them, and how do we utilize these tools that we currently have to help transition this interface between autonomy and independence and education? And so there are a few things we've done to try to do that. In the Center for Surgical Anatomy and Technique, which was founded by John Skandalakis several years ago, many of you may know him, we focus on the fact that conceptual understanding of anatomy for surgeons is key. But we can actually provide that anatomy and refreshers to that anatomy in mechanisms that can be delivered to your hand. And so while there's a number of different digital platforms available in the world, the ones I'm going to focus on right now are those that are really germane to surgeons and educators. And so this is a screenshot of one of our apps. It's actually iPad-based. We've now converted to make it available on phone size. And similarly, some of you in the room may be familiar with two other of our apps. This is a lung app, which is actually an interface for patients as well as educators. But one of the things that's really important about having anatomy available to you is that many surgeons, the last time they touched anatomy as a practical educational tool was in the classroom as students. There's no opportunity to refresh over the course of your life. So not only is this an opportunity for learners, it's also an opportunity for practicing surgeons to refresh their understanding of anatomy before they go into an operating room in a handheld device. The importance of this is really, again, giving confidence and understanding of what you're going to do the next day, or that morning, or later that day. And so we've built apps like this, and we're not the only people that have done this. There are many different tools like this that allow the learner or the practicing physician to prep reasonably or to discuss things on a shared platform. And when you think about shared conversations, one of the most optimal ways to do that in the current environment would be simultaneous shared experiences. And so there are devices out there. This is an example of a HoloLens, which is a device that you can wear, which it's essentially augmented reality. The actual individual, these pictures here are not actually there. The person actually is seeing them through the device. And as we develop digital platforms that can actually allow you to remotely see the same thing, so it's kind of like a Google Doc. You can actually have a file running simultaneously in two different institutions. And so the lung app was actually a collaboration between one of the thoracic surgeons actually at Beth Israel in Boston and Mr. Sanchetti, one of our thoracic surgeons here in our team, with the concept that eventually we will be able to use a device like a HoloLens to actually manipulate the same tools at the same time. So, important data. Most trainees can complete technical aspects of the majority of operations by the end of their PGY 3 year. The sophistication to know that is limited. The ability to plan, handle, and respond to emergencies is the thing that's adjusting on the fly that we need independence to do and autonomy. The idea of having digital platforms to share this information is one of the most important things we can do, because what we have to understand is that the first time a surgeon does a procedure independently should not be when no one else is around to backstop them. So we need to be able to introduce this information during their training paradigm, and in order to do that we have to share common information. We know that there's a number of studies that demonstrate that trainees can do this. In the past, training was done on an apprentice style. Residents were more comfortable because they worked with the same individuals repeatedly. Faculty knew what they could do. The new paradigm is multiple hospitals, multiple services, expanded footprints, shorter rotations, and less continuity. So we need to use some device or some mechanism to transfer competence so that I can tell Dr. Latouf, hey, Dr. Pickens can do this, and we've proven that. Using digital platforms, shared information are mechanisms to do this. It does, however, require trust. It requires Dr. Latouf to trust me, and it requires both of us to trust the trainee. And so, of course, putting your head in the lion's mouth, as Churchill said, is necessary in order for the performance to be a success. So the bottom line comes down to, does objective technical assessment substitute for experience and background? Can Dr. Salam trust me saying, hey, this person's passed this test, we can do this? And so he can do this in your OR the same way he can do it in my OR. So we need to create a flexible framework to validate technical skills. Using digital platforms will allow us to do that, using shared experiences either on a HoloLens or a similar platform, or video surveillance will help us do that as well. And so we propose that a number of different tools will help us transfer that competence to individuals and allow for the independence to be transferred across the spectrum of surgical education. So the bottom line is that with training success, and again, compacting this into 8 minutes, we need to keep the goals in mind. We need to prioritize progressive independence. We need to utilize novel tools like digital platforms, cadaveric simulation, and which you'll hear about a little later today, I suspect. And we need to have some mechanism for objective transfer of competence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Delman, for that presentation of new technology. The next presentation will be Dr. Minia Nazal.
Good morning, and thank you for the floor. Thank you, Dr. Latouf, Dr. Labib, and the organizing committee. So in 8 minutes, I'm supposed to tell you how we are transformed education University of Toledo in my role as a program director for about 7.5 years, then as a chair of education. We all know that training, as Dr. Delman said, started many years ago, only 3,500 years ago. And the Egyptians trained their apprenticeship method. Then the people who have other organizations use the same methods. But now, unfortunately, we cannot use those methods now. Somebody said many years ago, there's no excuse today for the surgeon to learn on the patient. That is William Mayo. That's 93 years ago. So people thinking about that for a long time. And the cost of the OR, the cost of the time spent, what the government is putting us under, being just watched all the time, the safety of the patient makes it almost impossible to train in the OR all the time. So we moved to simulation. I was given actually the job about 8 years ago to transform simulation from only 10,000 square area to a larger area and full accreditation. And we started looking into those possibilities in the University of Toledo. We knew that a simulator can be anything from a human cadaver to a mannequin, which has been there for a long time. But the problem that technology is advancing so fast that you cannot keep up. My sons, and one of them is sitting here as a medical student in Emory, said at one stage that we know nothing about technology. I appreciate that, but I learned it, so I'm here. So through simulation, you can move from alerting the students about the problem, teaching them, keep repeating until they master it, then take them to the field. Without that, you cannot teach anybody nowadays how to go into surgery. We are not only talking about procedures. The problem in medicine nowadays is a teamwork, and not anymore in the past that the surgeon in charge of everything. So we have to teach them psychomotor skills, technical skills, clinical judgment. Repeated practices are important. The opportunity to learn on their own, because we are limited by the 80 hours. So we tell them this is the way you need to learn, go learn on your own. And then we are supposed to reduce the operative time while in surgery. But until the students or the residents, sorry, you cannot suture that fast, I'll just show you how here, go practice in the simulation center, come back in a week. So we are using the simulation center to do team build-up, stress reduction, patient care, and all fields of education are represented in simulation. But we cover mostly, as surgeons, those fields, which is everything we use in the OR, from laparoscopy, energy, robotic surgery, base skull, everything really has something to offer in the simulation center. We teach everything that McGee talked about before in the simulation center, but at the expense of finances, at the expense of the surgeon's time, because it is a non-RVU. And this is the problem. You have to be paid for that. Guess what? Nobody is paid for that. We have evidence from the literature that if you use the simulation center, you will reduce the time of learning by almost 1/2. And that takes you, how are we going to use this? I'm going to go through some ideas we are using at the University of Toledo. The very simple technique, which is the boxes. We used to have a box for each resident. We moved away from that now. Now we have the high fidelity, virtual reality, augmented reality, all these new terms coming. And you can see here the smaller ones are actually the intermediate fidelity to the very high fidelity, but each one costs about $150,000 to buy, and that's the problem. Our mission in the University of Toledo, when we established the 65,000 square foot center, which is about 4-story building, and it is taken almost the second largest in the country to transform learning between residents, students of all disciplines, whether it is nursing, pharmacy, and all people who are participating in surgery in one field. The number of visitors to the simulation center is started from few numbers to about 20,000 visitors a year now. And we are not the only users. Actually, the Minister of Defense is using it, or the defense group. We have the firefighters using it. Companies are using it to train their people because of them. And we go from the very simple task to the most advanced task in the learning process. This is our center. Actually, some of you were in the University of Toledo as residents. It is actually a marvelous place to go. First place you go, you see actually the virtual reality on the wall, some of the learning that you see in that area. Students are watched from a room. Nobody sees who is inside the room. They are working in teams, cameras all over, and they are recording every move they do, and then we analyze that at a later stage. Then we use mannequins, we use actually thought leaders, as we call them in that area, bring them from different disciplines to teach the residents and the students the way how to learn surgery, how to learn all disciplines actually of medicine. This is an example, for example, team simulation. Usually the teams fight from surgery, medicine, ER. We put them in one room and watch how they are going to behave. And we just actually offer them at the end some criticism, where did they go right, where did they go wrong. This is another advanced clinical simulation. We teach them from a central line insertion to the most advanced surgical procedure. And intubation, lumbar puncture, and this is the area of pride we have. You go in a room which is about 10 by 10 feet, put your goggles on, and then you can do anything on a 3D imaging. You can actually look at the body, pick up an organ, that organ goes out, and then work on that organ the way you want. It is the first in Ohio. I'm not sure how many other centers have it. Then what we call the anatomy table. You just lay on the anatomy table, and then your organs will show up and take them one by one in order to teach anatomy. Actually, one of the most famous books from anatomy and apps came from University of Toledo. It was sold to, I think, McGraw at that time. They're telling me 1 minute, but we also moved to the cadavers, because I think we cannot teach everything on one area, including simulators, different anatomy areas, the 3Ds, the fusion and mugen technology, all in one area really to transform education. Robotic surgery is there, full procedure simulation, 3D printing we have for different organs before we do surgery in them, and augmented reality is present. This is a CT scan, by the way. We have one of the attending transform the CT scan into a reality through an app. And then you produce this image from the CT scan, take it to the OR and work on the patient in simulation. So you can do the surgery before you start. A fracture, and how to fix the fracture, you can rotate it on the same reality. And this is a PE, you can see it in the middle of the lungs, that you can actually teach the students, the residents, how to improve management of those cases. The future is still not here, unfortunately. So we need to learn more and more. We have to learn through technology. And the problem is, it's financially draining. And this is the main issue. And I hope we can talk about that as we go in the lectures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nazal, for that insightful look into the future of education. Our last but not least presentation is Dr. Sharon Murat-Wagstaff.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. Latouf, for the honor of being here with you and with so many colleagues today. This morning, I'd like to talk a little bit about both the impact of simulation as well as some of the methods that we're using. And I thank Dr. Nazal for that inspiring look at your what you've done in Toledo. When we think about simulation, we often think about simply a task trainer and learning to do a procedure, but there's far more that we can do, and that the literature shows, with more than 300,000 publications now, that can be effective. It can foster learning and increase knowledge, certainly. We can establish competence now in an informative way with using both formative testing and high-stakes testing. We can uncover design flaws in not only our procedures and processes, but in our entire institutions by using cardboard cutouts and so forth in simulation before we move into a new facility or use a new procedure. We can carry out surgical planning and rehearsal with no risk to the patient. We can replicate and prevent future adverse events. So, for example, taking instances from our M&M conferences, replicating that in simulation and figuring out new ways to avoid those events. We can use it for scrimmage to improve teamwork, communication, care processes, and the actual culture of safety in the operating room. And also, finally, to improve patient outcomes. There are numerous modalities that you heard about, particularly from Dr. Nizal earlier. These can, in the top right corner, can vary. We forget sometimes about these very simple sorts of simulations that we can use. And remembering that learning is a stepwise process. You don't have to do this for the first time in the operating room. You can practice, for example, this is a cricothyrotomy model made with a cardboard, a piece of cardboard, a zip tie, some felt, and so forth. And that's been used, for example, at Mayo, and we're beginning to use it here as well. On the top left, you see the basic FLS trainer at Mayo Clinic and at Cleveland, Toledo, a number of other places are using 3D printing. And that extends from simple models, simple anatomic models, to very advanced models. For example, when Mayo and others, when Mayo did their first separation of Siamese twins, they used imaging to then do 3D printing to rehearse that procedure many, many times before they actually performed it in the operating room. And then finally, in the lower right-hand column, or right-hand photo, you see a high-fidelity simulation in an immersive environment. We learned a lot about simulation from the airlines, really. The first link trainers were used in the airline industry back in the 1940s. And we've learned quite a lot from the airlines about crew resource management and so forth. I would submit that we need to continue to learn from other high-risk industries and bring those ideas into healthcare. One of our colleagues here today was talking with me last night about AT&T's work with driverless cars, and we should be learning from industries such as that. Here, if you looked at the New York Times last Sunday, you saw this investigative reporting on the Lion Air crash, where 189 people died. In this instance, people are not saying that, oh, the pilot should have known better. Instead, the pilots are saying, we should have been had the opportunity to be in the simulator and simulate this change that Boeing thought was too small to need really simulator training. We think it needs simulator training. Imagine a day when our surgeons say, I'm not going into a new procedure unless I've had the opportunity to be in the simulation center. I need routine opportunities to go back to the simulator regardless of my level of practice and my years, so that I can stay refreshed and work with interdisciplinary teams. So I think we need to continue to learn from the airline industry and others. One of the programs that we use here at Emory that I want to mention this morning is our co-management of operating room emergencies, or CORE. This is a high-fidelity immersive simulation that we run with teams of surgeons from all different specialties. First of all, there's the setup, and you see here on the left a view from the control room. In the control room, we would have our simulation technologists running the mannequin. These mannequins run about $100,000. We have our faculty in the control room, and the simulation is run. We can manage the mannequin, and we have a team in the mock operating room, as you see in the middle here. With we typically run 2 surgeons, 2 anesthesiologists, 2 nurses, a scrub tech, and a Confederate in that scenario. And then, importantly, we go back to a conference room and spend about 45 minutes debriefing what happened in the simulation. This has yielded for us not only advances in learning for individuals, but learning across the team. People saying, "Oh, I didn't realize that's what you were trying to do when you're setting up, and how can we better manage that as a team?" Also, we've discovered a number of system problems that we can go back to the operating room and fix. So this is fully integrated with our clinical healthcare system. You can see that we look here at our clinical performance results up in the upper left-hand corner. Then we run the simulation based on that. Then we get our insights and feedback and recommendations from the team. We take that to our OR committees, to the Department of Surgery Quality Committee, and so forth. And then we make changes and take them back into simulation again, so that we can have a virtuous circle in which we can actually improve care rapidly in the operating room. We've seen anecdotes such as this: a surgeon who participated in simulation and then several weeks later came to me and said, "You won't believe what happened to me. I was in the ambulatory surgery center, perfectly healthy patient, went into PEA, and I felt so confident and knew exactly what to do because we've been running this in simulation." I didn't want to overwhelm you with all the data from the literature, but it's certainly there, and I'm happy to share that with you. Showing for example, at the VA, that when they did a multi-site study with team training, they were able to actually show a dose-response relationship in mortality reduction. So at the end of the day, I always think when people come to me and say, "Oh, simulation was terrific," I said, "Well, what did you really get out of it?" I always expect that they're going to tell me about the procedure, and instead they say things like this: instead of pointing fingers at each other, we're just sitting down and saying, "We can figure out how to improve this together." It's really a mind shift. So I thank you for listening, and I thank all of these people for
So that concludes the presentations that we've had for session 1. We would like to now open the floor for questions from our audience.
Well, I think I can talk. I'm fine. So, Dr. Parker, I mean, you presented some method of teaching students into college, medical school. So, and you collect a lot of information. And that's more of the information could be used to improve their learning process. Did you get enough information, through watching the students learning, that you adapted your method of delivery based on the information you have? Adapted per student or adapted per group?
So I think it's a great question. So did we adapt what we're doing, basically based on the data? And in fact, we are. So the beauty of having a real-time stream of data is that we can do things like predict who is going to struggle in the courses and actually inject reminders and very precisely timed nudges to students that basically just when that student is going to drop off of learning, an individualized automated element can go to that student, pointing them to a resource or pointing them to a particular reminder. So that's one aspect. The other that's a little more at the aggregate level really is quality improvement. So we don't have to wait to the end of a semester or the end of a year to figure out what went wrong. We can actually look at the data coming out, feed that back into improvement of the material. So we're constantly updating the courses based on real-time data that we see coming in. So that's 2 answers to that.
One quick question, Dr. Parker. How are you evaluating the comprehension of the online information?
Is it through the traditional testing formats, or are there special things that you're doing to?
So the graph I briefly showed was looking at learning gains and learning outcomes. So very directly the short-term outcomes, we look at pre-testing and post-testing in the courses. And then what we're doing is working with partner schools to tie this to their data in the first and second year board scores and things like that. So we want to work with partner schools to look at not only their pre-admission data, so MCAT scores, rigorous school that someone went to, socioeconomic background, tie that to what happens online, tie that to what happens after. So we're trying to get this slightly more continuous view of the data that goes beyond the courses. Just one. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Partner again. So with your experience currently with this online learning, do you kind of foresee a future without any physical classrooms at all? Is there still a need for physical classrooms?
Well, certainly in the practice of medicine, seeing patients is indispensable, so that's not exactly the classroom component. I do think we'll shift further and further away from the physical classroom. I think the other part of it that I alluded to just slightly in the talk was that what happens in the classroom can be higher level. You know, there's not a huge benefit to having people sit and just get transmitted information. So what can we do that actually gives people this conceptual foundation, lets them play with the material before getting to a place where teachers can actually have the discussion that they want. So that's really, I think, we may see a compression, but we'll see a transformation of what actually happens in the classroom. I don't think it'll be eliminated entirely, I just think we need to shift that.
One other question?
For Dr. Parker, Dr. Nizal, in your programs, what does the typical going through or being used mean? What does a typical partner do when they engage in your program? Is it a year long, 3 months? I mean, just give a brief sort of, what does it mean when they use your program?
Thank you.
So a quick answer to that, self-paced, remote, they can do this online, asynchronous, usually over the course of about 10 weeks. And with some ability to pace the students, but an ability for students to interact with each other online and interact with teachers online, but something that's done asynchronously online.
In about 3 months, sort of.
In about 3 months typically for a given course.
So in our case, it should be 6 year long because this is where the residents are. But we ran a study, compared two groups of students who are fourth year students going to surgery. Some of them will appear like once a week to the simulation center, teach them certain skills. And the other group just go through the usual way of teaching. And then at the end of the rotations, we give them a whole week focused training, the same material. And they looked at their performance, there was no difference. The main difference was depending on the users, how much did they use the center. So the problem, you cannot force them, but we built the schedule over 1 year, keep repeating it and adding a new technology as we go.
This question is to both Dr. I know his name, Delman, and Murat Wagstaff. You've been doing the simulation, the core simulation now for how long?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. How quickly does this penetrate into the actual operating room on, you know, where it's really making an impact on a daily basis?
Thank you for that question. We don't have data for that. We have anecdotes like Dr. Schaefer's testimonial. But what we say to groups as they come in is that you're not here so that we can train you up. You're here because you're a role model. We know we're not going to reach every person in the operating room, but you are a role model when you go back to the OR, and others will notice. And we anecdotally, we do hear that happening.
I will say one thing. One of the most important aspects of this, and the difference between foundational education and clinical education on the back end, is that the outcomes that we measure are are significant in that they're the outcomes on patients. And so, one of the things that Sharon does exceptionally well is she recognizes that the work that's done in the sim lab is translating through to patient outcomes. And some of that is moving the needle just down in the safety standpoint and certainly in the operating room culture. I think similarly, the same thing's true with the platforms that that I sort of mentioned in the aspects of what we do. What we see is one of the things that we do is we often tell residents when they're doing their simulations that they fail. And surgical residents don't like to be told they're failing anything. But the truth of the matter is that we explain to them we'd rather fail them because the remediation is much more valuable than even the process at hand. And in other words, the learning and assessment process. The actual intentional, by design, approach to additional education. Because the truth of the matter is what we're really trying to achieve is that when they are, as I like to say, July 1st PGY year 6, that they are not sitting there by themselves in rural Georgia going, wait, what do I need to do now? Because there's no one to backstop them. And so what we're designing now is an outcomes assessment for the first year to 2 in practice, because that'll be really the key. It's that patients have better outcomes because of all of that what they've done during training, whether it's simulation in the lab directly, high fidelity simulation, or just hands-on directed education, but with supervision and then independence.
Dr. Delman and Dr. Wagstaff, one follow-up question to that. How do you give measurable credit to the actual resident for doing the simulation, and how do you, for lack of a better term, reward the faculty for actually teaching the simulation?
So from our perspective, one of the most significant things is the concept of the objective transfer of competence. So the idea being, there are a number of ways to assess competence. Michigan's done a really good job demonstrating that even lay people can interpret good surgery versus bad surgery in that simple dichotomous sort of sense. And so we use first a video assessment. We record that video assessment, and the residents then is made aware to the faculty of the residents that have completed that. One of the things that we're trying to do at a national level is provide essentially a certificate. I don't want to get into credentialing discussions right now, but right now, just really simply, as I've told people multiple times, I'm still credentialed to do a Whipple, which, as many of you know, is a really complicated operation, which I haven't done in 14 years. And so I wouldn't do a Whipple on my dog. But the idea is, if you can walk, or if you can actually keep a certificate of competence, the technical aspects that a trainee has completed, amongst the faculty is simple, but going institution to institution, it's even more important, and probably should serve the foundation for future credentialing. So that's one aspect. The aspect of giving the faculty credit, at Emory, we keep an annual report card. We literally provide every faculty member their report card of what activities they've completed. I'll let Sharon speak a little bit about core in a moment, but that report card goes to the faculty member at the end of the year and to their division chief, and then a copy goes to our chair also. But the division chief, has a record of all of this educational activities and their evaluations and on a graph, which puts them wherever they are relative to their peers, as well as all their comments from medical student all the way up to peers and so on. So they keep that record themselves, and it's used for promotions and other things. It's used for assessments of salary and things like that, bonuses and that sort of thing. So it does go. It is carried with the faculty member. Our office tracks all that.
Other questions?
This is for the question for the panel. How do you train residents to deal with the unexpected in the operating room? I personally would not like to fly on a plane with a pilot who can only fly in good weather.
When in my previous life, when I was in Boston, we actually looked at competencies of residents that are not covered in the typical 6 core competencies, and we ran sets of 7 scenarios, and then I had a team of 20 physicians who were trained to rate those by video remotely, and we could demonstrate differences between experts and novices in not only how do you make your plan, but how do you adjust when things change. And we could show that, and we could make that change during simulation. We could add a crisis or an unexpected event and see how they dealt with that, debrief it, and also quantitatively measure their performance and remediate based on that video performance in exactly what you say, the unexpected situation?
So I can tell you, we use the cadavers for that. Difficult to do that on a simulation, a real disaster, we call it. So we have the cadavers like in trauma, and some cadavers you can start really just a fluid like blood. And while they are doing the surgery, for example, and we tell them there's a sound effect in the room, and one of the senior residents directing that while we are in the back watching it, and then we start a bleeder. How are they going to behave now? And sometimes you increase the bleeder in order to see how they behave. But I will tell you, we measured, there's an experiment we are doing now, we are measuring the stress level in the team. And believe it or not, they go tachycardic, they do everything. So it's like a real state in the OR.
I think that's a question that we ask all the time, Dr. Salam, and I think Dr. Wagstaff does a really nice job of creating that environment. As you just heard, it does create some tachycardia amongst individuals. At the end of the day, you can't plan for the unexpected. That's the whole point, right? And having lived through some of the most unexpected events, I was in New York as a resident when the Twin Towers came down, you cannot plan for a crisis. What you can do is be really prepared with what goes on routinely so that crisis is not such a dramatic change from what you're comfortable doing. You know more than anybody that, just knowing the anatomy of an individual is helpful in handling a crisis. But it is really important. This is where autonomy and independence is critical. And while there's a lot of misinterpretation from lay press and individuals outside of the medical field about the concepts of allowing a resident that independence, or a trainee I should say, because many of them fellows, that independence, it's really critical to the safety of patients when those individuals go out on their own, fly in bad weather, that they have those opportunities to experience independently the challenges that occur when the unexpected happens in the operating room. So part of that is preparing the individual for the routine, the mundane. That is what allows you to prepare for the unexpected and handle the unexpected when it comes up in the operating room. Because the only thing we can't do is really, say, oh God, the stapler just broke, it didn't work. Like, you can't really know what the unexpected event's going to be, or it's stuck on this vessel and now I can't get it off. Like that. Those are things that, how do we handle that? Well, part of that is understanding what's the latitudes that I have from having done this 1,000 times already.
I think the inclusion of a fire drill checklist is a very important concept, particularly in the OR. And on a daily basis, just reminding people that catastrophes can occur. I think we get lulled into complacency by having operations go well so often that you forget that it is one cut away from being a very catastrophic situation.
I think that's a really good point. I was doing a neck dissection a few years ago, and a resident tore the carotid, which is not a good thing, as you know. And the anesthesiology, the anesthetist afterwards said, it was shocking that how we slowed the operation down when that happened. We actually slowed down, and everything went fine. It was not a big deal in the end. I mean, it's not a big deal. It sounds like a big deal, it wasn't. And so the point is, when you're comfortable, it's when you have that checklist, you slow everybody down and you meticulously follow whatever the pathways are for emergencies that we've created. Any experienced surgeon in the room does that naturally. The key thing is to give the trainees that experience so that they also do that naturally. And rather than getting frenetic, oh my gosh, there's a lot of blood in the field, what do I do, running around in circles, it's okay, let's calm down and make sure we follow the steps, we know what to do. They know what to do by the time they're a third-year resident. They have the technical skills to do it. It's the mental capacity to handle those things.
I want to add one thing here, that we always simulated to flying. It's impossible to be like flying. Flying 1 + 1 equal to, when the plane goes down, nothing is done. You can do, everybody will die. But what's happening in surgery, you will never replicate the stress of real surgery. No way. And you will never replicate the adhesions like we see. We'll never replicate actually the problems. But at least they have the confidence because they know the steps. They will deal with it. And if they cannot deal with it, at least they are at a stage of learning. They don't need help except by telling somebody do this or that. But they know the anatomy, the suturing, the fast, how to use the devices. That's what we train them, honestly.
We have opportunity for one last question. We're going to grant that to Dr. Omar Lakatouf as he brings his question forward.
Thank you very much. My question is on the business model that that 3 different institutions have. Harvard has created a product that uses internally for its students and make it available to people around the world, and that creates a revenue model. University of Toledo is creating a similar model and bringing the Fire Department, Department of Defense, and that creates a revenue model that underwrites. Does Emory have such a model where we can serve the community at large and create a revenue model to underwrite this fantastic program?
About the University of Toledo, really, it does not cover even a fraction of the expenses. So the best model really to either have the money coming from somebody, which is not going to happen all the time, or just be partner with industry. This is the only way. To partner with industry, they will supply whatever you need.
Thank you all for a wonderful session.
So we are actually ahead of time, which is remarkable. Thank you so much for session 1. Sir, how are you? So you're going to go first. Let's have a question. Go second.
I'm glad that maybe we knew when we were going together. Maybe. Great.
Well, actually, we changed the order. So we will see the recording. Okay. Thank you very much. By the way, great job with the arts. Yeah. Very nice. I'm sorry. Yes. We are going to wait 4 more minutes.
Oh, no.
So, we are 2 minutes to start our session, and my name is Samah Labib. I'm an orthopedic surgeon here at Emory, and I am the co-chair of the meeting today. I will be the moderator for the next session, Advances and Influence of Telecom and Media Technology on the Future of Health Education and Healthcare Delivery. We are honored to have a distinguished panel today. We made a little change in the order of the talks, but the same speakers remain. We're going to start with Mr. Mo Mustafa, Vice President of AT&T, who will tell us about the new and exciting advances in telecom. We will follow with Professor Hazem Rifai, Chair and Professor of Telecommunication at the University of Oklahoma. We will follow then by Dr. Scott Bowden, who is the Chair of the Department of Orthopedics, and actually my boss, who will tell us about the Emory Innovation Hub. And then finally, we will close with Dr. Najwa Khouri-Boulos, a professor of pediatrics and infectious disease at the University of Jordan, and she will talk to us today about education, online education. We will start exactly at 10 o'clock. Mr. Mustafa, would you please, everybody, introduce themselves and to the audience?
Yeah, hello. I'm Mo Mustafa. I'm Vice President at AT&T for Technical Services in the Southeast region.
Hazem Rifai, Professor at the University of Oklahoma and Direct Wireless Coexistence Lab.
I'm Najwa Khouri-Boulos. I was the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics, 3 times established the Infection Control Committee, the Board of Jordan. So basically I had a huge educational portfolio. I'm very glad to be part of here, and in fact I'm going to tell you that I feel very envious. None of what you have been talking about is really, everything you spoke about is on our wish list, and I do hope and really aim to return to Jordan with an effector arm where we really can start on this process. It is much needed, and thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. So we will start with Mr. Mustafa.
Good morning again. I don't know. Yeah. I think it's, so, as a technologist and a trained engineer, when I hear things like, we will never be able to do something, right? Like Dr. Munir Nazar said, we will never simulate the behavior and the psychology of a physician. To me, that's a great challenge. Are we able to do that? In fact, like Dr. Sharon said, there are parallels that you can look at and grab from one industry to another and try to play the adjacency games where you actually can export some of these things from one area to another. So, you know, if the insurance companies can actually predict 80% within a week that you're going to have an accident, I may not have 100%, but 80% is better than a coin flip, right? So some of these things are actually, in terms of technology and predictive analytics and artificial intelligence, is really where the future is. I'm not going to talk about that, although it is embedded into some of the slides that I have. But what I'm going to talk about is an enabler called 5G. You all heard about the 5G buzz out there. And so I'm not going to drain all these slides. It's maybe a little bit on the complicated side from a technical standpoint. But I'm going to hit on highlights and hopefully reserve some time for the questions and answers for you sort of to ask what is on your mind and what you want to really know about 5G. 5G is actually a competitive advantage to a lot of countries, including the United States. You probably heard in the press and media and so on, the Chinese trying to get into this game very strongly through Huawei. And so it is a very critical national advantage to the United States to be ahead of the game on this topic. I know I got 8 minutes and 20 slides, but we'll see if we can speed along. I'm going to highlight just a couple of things on this slide. What is 5G, right? Basically, it's a couple of things, right? It uses millimeter wave, which is short waves, like 30 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz. Those are very small waves versus what we have today in the wireless industry or the cellular systems where you're using 702 gig, right? So it's very short waves, and from a physics standpoint, that has a lot of advantages and disadvantages that I'll kind of cover in terms of what the benefits of 5G is. So that's one key thing that is unique to 5G is short waves, right? And from a physics standpoint, short wave doesn't go through walls very well, doesn't go through obstructions very well, and so on and so forth. So you got pluses and minuses for that. The other thing is, because they are short waves, you actually need a lot of cell towers. And they are short, like think a pole on the street, that's as high as it goes, or a street light, that's as far as they go. But you need a lot of them. You need a lot of them everywhere, right? The rest of the characteristics of 5G has to do with the fact that it's shortwave, and it has to do with what we call in the industry interference mitigation. Because these things bounce off of buildings and ricochet all over the place, what you want to do is try to filter a lot of that noise out and make it more intelligible, right? So through a lot of telecommunication technology techniques to modulate these things to make a difference and make an intelligent sort of organized chaos with all these signals that are bouncing all over the place. So again, not a lot to know about other than the two things, right? Is the shortwave and lots of towers, right? So what are the benefits of 5G? You go from 4G to 5G. Just to highlight a few things, you have latency is the biggest factor in 5G. Latency is based on the standards is going to go from improved by 50 folds. So from a 50 millisecond to 1 millisecond. Why is that important? If you're driving an autonomous car and you're issuing a command, right, 50 milliseconds, you would have already been through 2 walls and 3 cars and so on. 1 millisecond, actually, the car would respond within 2 centimeters from the command. You can actually do a lot of things with that. Think not just cars, think of hepatics, right, in terms of surgery. Right? If I have gloves and I want to issue a command remotely, by the time that signal travels to the patient, 50 millisecond is a big error margin. But within 1 millisecond, you can actually do a lot. Also, the advantage of 1 millisecond is battery life. How many people their phones go out in 4 hours? Right? What about if I tell you 10 years? Right? Why is that? Right? All of that stuff, the turnaround circles, back and forth, the response time, all of the turnaround trip is cut 50 times lower. So you actually improve the battery life on these devices. That's a key thing with this technology. Capacity is a big deal. You're going to have about 1,000 times more connections that you can deal with simultaneously right? On the same channel. So capacity is 1,000 times more. What else? You got speed. How many people get on their phones LTE a 10 megabit per second, or your home, you get what, 20, 50 maybe when you buy 100, right? This thing is 100 times more. So what does that mean? At peak speeds, you can actually hit 20 gigabit per second. Okay? The average is going to be 1, right, which is what you get today when you buy fiber in your home. But that's what we're talking about. So why speed and capacity and latency is important, right? So you have a speed that you can actually download a movie in a second. Right, with a 20 gigabit per second. Why is that important? Is because you have images, MRIs and images and so on that needs to be transmitted across the wire with a lot faster speeds that you can actually utilize faster. I got the 1 minute hook. I got a lot more, but hopefully I whetted your appetite enough to ask questions, okay? Thank you.
I can go over these slides if you like. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Dr. Latouf, thank you for inviting me. Dr. Sabar, thank you for inviting me to be part of this group. So I'm a professor at the University of Oklahoma. I'm just waiting until we get this going. From the engineering background. So I see a lot of MDs. I'm not an MD, and I'm more of engineering side. So I was tasked more or less to talk about IoT, and I would like to go over the IoT to explain it in a little bit where you can really get a grasp of it. With 8 minutes, what is my 1 minute deal? Okay. So I'll talk about the Internet of Things. I'll put some stats, some wearable devices, medical devices in there, and then talk about some of the work that we do at the University of Oklahoma for the FDA, and then some sort of testing protocol, but I'll probably skip it. I tried not to put any equations in there. So it would be just like going through the process, and then my thoughts on it, and those are thoughts covered really by a lot of researchers too in there, given that it's a thought leadership. So what is an IoT? Internet of Things. So it's just a network of devices with intelligent sensing capability. It can sense things, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your oxygenation, and so on and so forth. So it's just a device that gets that information, but it's capable of connecting and interconnecting these devices among themselves and outside to the internet too. So that's more or less. So I'll give you an example on that. Let's see, where's the pointer? So you look at, these are the IoTs, these are the sensors, the smart sensors that are going everywhere in there. You'll have some sort of a gateway, but you might not have a gateway. A gateway is a process that you get into the network, your data going into the network. So you might have it, you might not have it. You could go directly to 5G, for example. If you have a SIM card in your device, it can go right away to the internet. But then, so you go through gateways, you go through towers, cellular towers into the cloud, into the Amazon cloud or the Microsoft cloud and so on. But then you have some sort of application. So when you talk about IoT, there is the device development, there is the software that comes to it, and then there is these interfaces that you do in there. So IoT stats on this, 25 billion IoT devices will be connected by 2020, and that's like 3.3 devices per person. $1.7 trillion in IoT spending by 2020, which is next year. That's in general. So you have IoT that is more of manufacturing, healthcare, industrial, automotive, and all of those things. But then for healthcare, you have 50 million wearable devices shipped in 2015. 173.4 million wearable devices in 2019. That's how many is going to be shipped in there. $120 billion in IoT healthcare in 2017, projected to be 500 or have $1 trillion, $500 billion by 2025. So it's just in 5 years or 6 years later. So that's a lot. So when you talk about 25 billion in devices, you're looking at these devices are sending information. So you look about the huge amount, the immense amount of that going out all to those servers. So keep that in mind. So you have the big data term in there. So, so you're looking at more of, FDA talked about general wellness devices, and they have less restrictions on validation and certification and so on. But you have the medical devices that have a very strict regulation in the process. So when you look at general wellness devices, wearable devices, how many of you have a smart device on you? All of you. I don't want to ask for hands, you know, because if you don't have, you're behind the curve. So that's really from the wellness side of it. You have the smartwatches, you have the ECGs, you have the skin patches that even measure your chemistry on your skin for your health. L'Oreal is coming out with a sticker, you put it on your body, it gives them pH measurement for you, for your skin health. And so you'll have the EEG that you can put it for sleep patterns and improvement of sleep. As a matter of fact, they teach, their CEOs that if you have a good sleep, then you can make next day good decisions, hard decisions, things like that. So you have all of these wearable devices that get into all of these activities levels and so on and so forth and so on. Blood pressure, glucose level, breathing, even biofeedback. You have devices that...
Innovation is not always easy. You look at many corporations, and unless they isolate an innovation environment, it's very hard because it's constantly competing with just keeping the lights on, keeping the microphones working. And it's really hard to get people in their everyday job to step away from that and think differently. And so healthcare is no different than that, and certainly Emory is certainly no different from that. And we can barely keep our core processes running and up to date, never mind the thought of apps and overlays. So with that, the premise for the Innovation Hub is simply that new reimbursement pressures are really going to require us in the healthcare industry to drive cost out. And if we don't do it, it will be done by bills and legislations and things that are going to do it in ways that are not necessarily best for patients. I'm also not convinced that new devices and drugs are going to be the answer to really creating that value. They create new treatments, but often that creates new expenditures and cost. And as I said, I think we're behind in seeking the efficiencies of digital technologies and leveraging the wealth of data assets, and that's even before we get to things like 5G that opens new doors. So in thinking about how to create an environment in Emory Healthcare that would make it a little bit easier and more user-friendly for both insiders to innovate and for outside partners to innovate, we thought about setting up an innovation hub that would be demand-driven. If you look at a lot of incubators, you have a collection of really cool technology, and then it's searching for use cases or applications. And if you're an investor, you invest in 10 of those and hope that one pays off. We can't afford to do that in healthcare, and we certainly can't afford to do that in Emory. So we took a different approach, which is, rather than collecting technologies and solutions, we were actually going to work on something that we control pretty well, which is understanding the problems and opportunities and pain points in everyday patient care, and then prioritize those, see which ones have the best opportunity, and then match them with technologies, kind of the reverse of what a typical incubator might do. And that's what we've nicknamed demand-driven innovation. The other thing is, one of the things in an academic medical center that we do very well is we have a brain trust, we have thought leaders, we have some intellectual property, we have patients, and we sort of have a place to test things. But there are things that we don't do inherently well, which is make decisions quickly, respond to the market well, have the latest technology, have sales and distribution channels, have marketing research, and all those other tools that are equally necessary for innovation. And so the way the Emory Healthcare Innovation Hub is set up structurally is basically to take the internal assets that we control pretty well. So that's thought leaders and users, which are not only clinicians, but also staff and patients, wealth of data assets, some intellectual property, and most importantly, the full spectrum of a care delivery system, whether it's a primary care office with 2 physicians, an urgent care center, a quaternary hospital, an affiliate hospital 90 miles away in a rural area. All of that, if we can wire it together and make it efficient and user-friendly, that's what we've nicknamed the internal assets or the internal ecosystem. But that alone is not enough to innovate. And so rather than trying to replicate the other parts of the ecosystem of innovation inside an academic medical center, which we're not so good at, what we've done is create an external structure to organize those external assets. Latest technology and devices through corporate strategic partners, business development expertise, commercialization potential, venture funding, sales and distribution channels, marketing, and the dollars to innovate. And so we've got an outside general contractor that's organized those external assets. And what we've done is we've wired them together to form the Emory Healthcare Innovation Hub. And so doing what we do good at, but making it user-friendly, in a sense, assembling the things that we don't do particularly well inside of a university and organizing it in a parallel track, and then hardwiring them together to make what is a virtual healthcare innovation hub that we hope will be user-friendly and will be the partner of choice for small companies and large that are looking to innovate in healthcare but need a testing ground and a proving ground and even someplace to figure out if what they want to do is worth doing. This is sort of an overview of some of the different components of our strategic partners by categories. So on the left side of the slide is again those internal assets and an integrated healthcare delivery system. Emory Healthcare is now a $4.4 billion healthcare enterprise. On the right side is the first strategic partner that we've announced publicly, which is ShareCare, and their emphasis is on the last mile. Patients spend maybe 5% of their time in medical facilities, and 95% of their time is at home or outside medical facilities. ShareCare has really put a lot of effort in digital app that connects the patient or the last mile and puts all their healthcare data in one place. They've got over 60 million users and are a tremendous tool. We're in the process of finalizing partnerships in companies that are involved with electronic medical record, secure cloud data services, artificial intelligence, companies that you wouldn't traditionally think of in healthcare that, let's just say, move things from place to place, companies that allow wireless communications are interested in the hub, some medical device and pharma companies, precision medicine and artificial intelligence companies. In addition, government, payers, and retail companies that are now, you read about in the newspaper, are trying to get into healthcare because 90% of the population lives within 5 miles of these outlets. And if you think about putting all those people together in a room and having a user-friendly integrated healthcare delivery system, as well as the thought leaders and end users, you can imagine the kind of problems and the kind of collaboration you could have together to actually accelerate innovation into that integrated delivery system. And so, in a nutshell, that is what the Emory Healthcare Innovation Hub is. That's the approach we're taking to try and create this microenvironment to make it easier, quicker, more user-friendly to both interface with Emory Healthcare and for our thought leaders to be able to get engaged and involved with innovation and driving technology into workflow without having to fly to Boston and all over the country, because we're going to bring those partners right here to Atlanta. So with that, I will say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bowden, and he is exactly 8 minutes for presentation. So we are a little late, but we are going to end with Dr. Professor Najwa Boulos, who will talk to us about online teaching in 8 minutes, and then that will leave us approximately 20 minutes for Q&A. I'm sure many questions need to be asked and answered.
Yeah.
Professor.
Thank you very much. Just by way of introduction, please note that I have been teaching at the University of Jordan, and in fact I envy each and every one of you about what you've been talking about. We are almost like a blast from the past, where everything was always delivered by a regular person talking to another person. So hopefully we will tell you a little bit of why I think we are now in great need of online education. And this was talking about disruption in healthcare. And before we continue further, I really would like to remind each and every one of you that when we talk about disruption, we mean disruption. And disruption is not necessarily in a positive sense. In the past few years in the Arab world, we have seen nothing short of a catastrophe in healthcare. And anybody who doesn't see that must be either blind or just have come to America to have better time. Basically, please note that we have at least 6 countries that were beautifully performing. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, to many ways, Sudan, Libya, all of these are now totally decimated, and I think it's very important for us to recognize that we really have to jumpstart education again as much as we can. I always add this because it's also not only disruption in healthcare, it's also disruption in the psyche of people. And please note the child on top and the child on the bottom, somehow it got translated. Our children used to look very much like the one on top. Unhappily now, many of them are refugees. And so all of these are very heartbreaking. However, I think there is ways that we can do, and I hope we will succeed. I wanted to let you know a little bit about Jordan as a prototype. Jordan, really, we had many good professionals. We had great medical schools. Many of our graduates are now hosting and being great doctors here. We had extremely good environmental improvement, major programs of immunization, improved access to care from MDG to SDG. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the MDG and SDG. I'll tell you a little bit so that we can move forward. Even a plan was made for the MDGs in Jordan, and I was honored to be the chairman of that committee, where we concentrated on vaccination, for child vaccination. It was greatly successful, both in Jordan and in the rest of the Arab world. Unhappily, much of this has fallen apart. Please note that whenever health systems go bad, they really go bad very quickly. But we are lucky. I keep on telling everyone, we are lucky in that we do have the Lego pieces. We can make a tower very fast. It's not the same as before. Now we have the SDG. And please note that the types of diseases have changed. In the past, we used to give vaccine or antibiotics and everybody got well. Now we are coming to the SDGs, where the SDGs have to address things like diabetes, like hypertension, like heart disease. And in this instance, we don't only have to have the doctor knowledgeable, we also have to have the patient knowledgeable. And I don't want to belabor the point, but the goal is really to make sure that the healthcare worker, again, is able to deliver care for such complex diseases. In addition to the fact that this is really a continuum. Notice, please, that we have a cycle of healthcare. You can't have a very great doctor coming from America and telling me what to do when the nurse cannot carry, when the patient doesn't know what he is talking about, when we don't have everybody has to be on the same page. We cannot handle it with just a shot of insulin or penicillin and finish with it. So I think the challenges for the future in our region are massive. And that's why we need more online, more help from everybody. The other trend that I want to point out is that there has been immigration of healthcare professionals from the region, and there are 3 kinds of categories where we are now category 2 countries, where many of our very well-trained people have gone out, and anybody who wants to look at this at the SDG, you can do so. And this is the kind of ratios we have. However, the importance of in the SDG, there's a critical role for the health provider. And the health provider is where I'm talking about, and where I'm working very hard at making sure that they can do the job. I'm just pointing out to you this very sad case of where people died unnecessarily in the valley because there was an accident, and universal health coverage should mean that whoever receives these accidents should know what to do. And for now, we don't have that. Possibly we can harness online, we can harness all kinds of modalities, and that's why I'm here. I hope that we can entice somebody to help us do that. So in any case, to make a long story short, number one, being myself, I started to make an online entity which is delivering healthcare information to physicians from my students, as well as we're trying to entice people to engage with us and provide some further information on their own. We called it Al-Arabiya for health awareness and application. And I'll tell you why I call this Al-Arabiya. Because there is no website now that gives any kind of information to patients in Arabic. Many of our graduates are coming from countries that did not teach in English. They have learned from Italy and so on, and they are practicing in the Gulf, many of them are practicing in the Jordan Valley. So we are going to create an entity which will deliver not only in English, in Arabic content, and I do hope that we will succeed in that endeavor. Lastly, I think the way forward is the following. I envisage this project to be one that I hope we will be able to obtain with many of you here. And I don't want our grads to return. Many of them, I tell them, don't return. Now that you are here, you can give us all the help we need online. It's available. Hopefully we will be having enough and sufficient people who might be interested to create that platform whereby people can give advice right here from the United States. In the past, we used to have to insist that somebody comes in person. In person is good, but it's not a must. However, I think this is a very big project. I do hope that we can find enough sufficient people who will help us make it available to every health center in Jordan, including the peripheral places, so that they can call up. They used to call me, Doctora, what to do? Now they're sending me x-rays on WhatsApp. Hopefully we might be able to send the WhatsApp messages to somebody right here. This is how the world is. Unhappily, our region, for it to go back to where it was, let alone not deteriorate, we have to be thinking along the lines of modern ways, and hopefully we can succeed again. Thank you.
And please, if you have a question, wave to one of the ushers, and they will field the questions. Sir.
Two questions about IoT. There's going to be a wealth of sensing data coming into the servers and up into the cloud, as you point out. Two things. One, how much of IoT is going to be sending information back down to those remote sensors? And secondly, what are your comments about security when we have all these sensors around the world?
So the first question, to answer the first question, they're going to be billions, as I said in my presentation. The sensing, it depends on the IoT. There are sensors that have actuators, meaning they can respond to a command too. And so you could have an intelligence on the network that says, after it received the information, to act on that information in there. So that's something that exists right now in industry, especially for automation, things that you have to automate. It automates it by knowing the information back and forth. In terms of security, you have to, we designed the internet to move data, but we did not design it looking at it from the, security first, then moving data. So, when it was designed just to move data, and then we thought, oh, this is very insecure, so let's secure it. Now that's a different story. They're looking at security and privacy is important as the design progresses. In the IoT structure, the design, the infrastructure, and so on. So you'll have encryption, you have to have an encryption, but you have to have 2-factor or 3-factor authentication. There are going to be a lot of even modeling your behavior. If I'm driving, I usually don't go and communicate that information. The probability of that happening is very less, so I don't expect it from you. But if it happens, then I'm going to just pay attention to it, or more or less validate it more, have more steps to validate that this is you, really you, and is not a spoofing. Because if you look at the network, billions, you could have an IoT that doesn't belong to the network, that is spoofing, that is sending information that is wrong, to allow the system to act on an information like that. And so you have different algorithms to go and make sure that this is not a spoofing by voting. Tell me how many sensors giving me temperature, for example, and this sensor then is faulty, is reporting the wrong temperature, and so on. So you have all of these layers of security and validation, because as we you talk about AI and machine learning. Machine learning is an algorithm running on a computer that all it does, it learns its environment, it can improve its experience by feeding it back information that made mistakes on. But ultimately, it's an algorithm. Anything you feed it is going to give you output. And that output has to be validated. You cannot, accept it immediately because it might not be. As I said, it's an algorithm. is going to give you information.
So, any other comments?
Yeah, so two things. In addition to authentication, you have a lot of the, especially the 5G networks, they are keeping HIPAA compliance in mind as they roll those networks specifically for healthcare. So that's one. The other thing is, with the amount of connections that we're talking about, you literally have 1 million connections per square kilometer, right? So the capacity is going to be there for the network to accommodate an enormous amount of connections, simultaneous connections, from a capacity standpoint. Obviously, the rest of it that I was talking about applies, which is speed and so on and so forth.
Any other comments from the panel? Any questions?
For the Emory Innovation Hub, are there any kind of platforms or opportunities for kind of innovators in the community or that's having a small startups and things, or is it mostly big organizations like ShareCare?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question was, does the Emory Healthcare Innovation Hub have opportunities for startups or small innovators in the community, or is it just large corporates? And the answer is, anybody that thinks they have a potential solution for a problem in healthcare that needs a validation site or sort of focus groups to validate it or to improve or enhance it, the Healthcare Hub is prepared to evaluate and interact with those. So we have interactions with startups that are looking for a validation or development partner. That's a delivery system, in addition to large strategic partners that are at an enterprise level looking for bigger and more complicated solutions. So it's a long-winded yes.
So just to add one more thing from AT&T perspective, we have, I believe right now, about 10 foundries, what we call 10 foundries, which is the equivalent of the innovation centers. One of them here is in Georgia Tech, but that one is focused on autonomous cars and sort of that piece of it. Houston is where we have our healthcare foundry, and it's open for anybody who's got ideas. We have about 5 patents per day that AT&T produces, so we welcome those things as we get ideas similar to Dr.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Since this is a very important forum, and since I raised an issue which for us I really think is terribly important, I wish that one of the major organizations, universities here, consider seriously about seeing in a systematic manner to be partners with us at the University of Jordan, creating what I'm talking about, whereby we really jumpstart all of this in order to improve the healthcare in the region. I don't think we can go back to the numbers of lectures that I gave forever. Nobody is going to repeat that. And I think we do need to harness technology in order to jumpstart the health system again. Because we really, within 5 to 10 years, I have a feeling things will be almost catastrophic. As the older people go and the younger people don't return. And I really think it would be very great if this can be done institutionally. We can link people up with the highest level in the government, including all the way up to the king. But I think the message is clear. We need help in order to make sure that the way we do and deliver healthcare should harness technology in a way which makes it easier to do it well.
And
I wish you can help us.
I'm sure that there are people in the audience and the speakers that will definitely step up. It's Professor Nazal first.
So really, it's great to have technology, but like the Innovation Hub in Emory, do you think there is something for those who cannot even reach the current health care? We have a lot of uninsured who have no access to technology, who has no access even to health. So we are planning for the future, but we are forgetting about the people who need it now, like in Jordan, but I'm talking about the US now.
Yes, I think that's a great question. One of the things that we think technology can do is help to bring care to more rural and underserved populations at a lower cost point. And so some of the projects and some of the strategic partners and some of the government partners in the Emory Healthcare Innovation Hub, that is one of the themes that a number of folks are going to collaborate together on. But you can imagine with 5G and combining it with retail outlets that are within, 5 miles or so of 90% of the population, and some sort of telemedicine or telehealth, that you could, at a lower price point, if you had a large self-insured, which could be like the state of Georgia, for example, or a large employer like a Walmart, if you could get all those parties in the room so that you took out the reimbursement part, which is hard to change at a federal level, then you could come up with pilots and innovation that could extend healthcare into those less well-served communities and populations at a much lower price point than trying to just sort of expand what we do now, which is probably not cost efficient.
And if I may add a little point, technology by time is cheaper and cheaper. And so at the University of Oklahoma, we have a program for preventing smoking. And so any smoker comes into the university, they'll give them a cell phone. So it's given, paid by the university or paid by the legislature. And then in the cell phone, there is an interaction with the patient to improve the probability of quitting of smoking. So there'll be, these wireless, pill bottles that it's open. If it's not open for taking the medicine, they're going to ping them with a test. They have surveys regularly. What did you do today? If they don't see activities the patient or the smoker is doing, they'll ping them to move around and do things, not because they identify the time when the smoker are going to be smoking or eager to smoke and try to prevent or reduce the duration. So the probability is less likely to help them to quit smoking.
So just a quick comment. So don't underestimate gamification in reducing health costs. Right? I mean, the things that I heard today are things like we're going to have a simulator and these mannequins in 100,000 and so on. You can actually replicate a lot of that stuff from an artificial intelligence standpoint, or fractions of that. The other thing that I would make is we are building a nationwide network called FirstNet for first responders. That was in direct response to 9/11, so that when you have desperate organizations, the FBI, Homeland Security, and so on, could not talk at that time. The government has awarded that, and we're building it. It will be done by next year or so. And that key foundation to that is actually healthcare, specifically rural access to a network. And that's part of the whole exercise of FirstNet.
Excellent. So we have 5 more minutes for one question and a comment. Yes, sir.
I'm in the interventional cardiology world, and we were very excited a few months ago. It was a robotic PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, performed from the US on a patient in India. An operator actually implanted a stent while sitting literally in the cath lab in the United States. So do you foresee this in the future, especially in the surgical robotic surgery? Do you think this would be technically possible with a technician on the other side and a physician operating the robot?
I actually...
It's absolutely yes, and this is going back to the latency, right, which is really key to all of this, right? So if I have a glove that I'm issuing commands, and right now the technology gives you, what, 50 milliseconds? That's a long time for you to issue a command to do something. But when it's millisecond, then you can be anywhere in the world and do the same surgery and separate that computer that you're behind doing the robotic commands, and you could be anywhere. Right?
I mean, it has to be systematic. The system in both ends have the advances in technology, because if you have it here, and if it's not there, it's going to be bottlenecked there. So, but if you have the whole network as one, yeah, you can do it. I mean, you can have the patient on the table and scan the patient and even do MRI and have the robot operate.
So, Ms. Matou?
Yes. Dr. Najma Khoury, I have a question for you. So in regards to your platform to give advice from the U.S. on the Al Arabiya Network for Awareness, you had mentioned one of the points you wanted was for it to be spoken in Arabic, and that was one of the limiting points. Now, is there a way for us, for example, for somebody to speak in English and then for it to be translated by somebody local again into professional Arabic and be transported that way? Or is that, am I understanding correctly what you're asking for?
Basically, translator can be myself. I'm very good in Arabic. So I can really give the whole lecture in Arabic. So that said, since for now, I do not have the, this is a costly endeavor, keep that in mind. But it's not an impediment because I can, whoever sends me anything that is credible, very well written, spoken in English, I can easily translate it very easily.
Excellent.
And maybe I can get further help from other guys who know enough Arabic around here. We have Muhammad here. He is my former friend, and I assume he knows some Arabic too. Some Arabic. So I think it's doable. The reason I wanted a little bit of Arabic, as I said, is because many of the doctors who are practicing in the field do not know English. And by the way, we're not going to only have Arabic as a language. We're also going to try to, as much as possible, review the local experience with certain diseases. Because at times, whenever you explain a disease that is elsewhere, it gives it better flourish to know what is going on in the countries. And that's part why, as I said, this website hopefully will happen and hopefully will be an educational one.
And if it's okay, the second part to my question was in regards to what Dr. asked, providing access to patients who don't have funds. So I know of a small, it's a dental software called Open Dental. They've awarded to nonprofits, so they provide electronic dental records to any nonprofits, a full license for free. And I can, is that something, I don't know of anything in
Well,
medicine.
currently, in fact, I'm currently working on some apps that I hope we will make them free online. For now, much of this effort that I have been doing is me paying myself. So there's no problem, but ultimately, we do want to deliver applications, especially for diabetics. These are going to be in Arabic and in English. Applications for patients who have asthma, we have many of them. And for this, of course, we will need help from those who might be equally, publicly minded. We want to do it, inshallah, without charging patients if we can.
Excellent. And with that, this is an excellent closure to this excellent symposium. Thank you so much for your time.
And it's quite a welcome experience. The session that I'm moderating today, for me, is really a very exciting session because I'm working with the leaders, the future leaders of healthcare. And I have gotten to know each of these three gentlemen very well over the last several months and years. And I can attest to you that you will see them in the next 10 years, 15 years as leaders in the world of surgery and cardiac surgery and education. I want to start by introducing the medical student, Muhammad al-Muhab, who came to Emory from the American University of Beirut about 3 months ago and spent 2 months with us. I had the honor and privilege of getting to know him. And as he and I had conversations, I truly realized that I was in the company of a person who is way above the scale of anything that I have dealt with before. Brilliant, very sharp. Although he was a medical student, he really was doing research at the level of someone who has already had a master's in public health. Quickly, we started on a couple of projects. We submitted for a grant. And then an opportunity came up that the federal government terminated funding for the guidelines.gov, the portal that had over 5,500 guidelines funded by the federal government over the last 20 years. As of August 2018, the funding ended, and that portal is no longer updated. So Muhammad and I had conversations, and that led to this time. David Zapata is my third year cardiothoracic surgery resident, equally sharp and brilliant. We were operating together one day, and I asked David, I said, David, what is it that we are doing or what is it that we are not doing to help your education? and David answered that question. I wish you would video record every operation that we do so that I can play it back afterwards. See the steps that you do, hear what you're telling me, the nurses, the scrub nurse, the perfusionist, the anesthesiologist, and be able to retrieve back and learn from those steps. Because when I'm in the operating room under fire, I do not necessarily record all of those interactions. And because of his comment, we're looking to bring in video recording. Then Nakul Valsankar, I was speaking with him, I said, your colleagues have come up with an idea, is this something of interest to you? And Nakul shared with me something that really was very fascinating. He has already established a program at his prior university, Indiana University, for online video education that he and his colleagues have built and has become a very extensive progress. So with that introduction of my three colleagues, I want to ask Muhammad to come to the podium and tell us about what he is doing.
All right, good morning everyone. Thank you Dr. Latul for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be a guest speaker here. It's a great privilege and honor for me to be here. So today I'll try to answer this question: is the interruption of federal funding for guidelines.gov an obstacle or opportunity? So just some background information. For those of you who are not familiar with guidelines.gov, it's essentially the domain name of the National Guidelines Clearinghouse, which is an initiative created by the federal government, more specifically the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, back in 1998, in partnership with other agencies, including the American Medical. The latest guidelines on congestive heart failure, you would go to the cardiac surgery section, then to the CHF subtitle, and then you'll find all the most updated guidelines from the different societies. We've also created hyperlinks to the most cited cardiac surgery papers with a one-phrase take-home message, and we've also uploaded major trials that the guidelines are based on. And the beauty of this project is that it allows for the barriers, the invisible barriers between the residents and the faculty members and students and residents to be destroyed. And what's even more beautiful about this project is that it transcends borders. I'm working on this project all the way from Lebanon, and to be honest, I couldn't have done a better job if I was here at Emory. And also, what's very important about this project is that it gives medical students, residents, and faculty members something to work on together in collaboration, and for an extended period of time. What are some of the future features that will be included? We plan on expanding to include all the guidelines from major professional societies, including European societies. We plan on also including guidelines, papers, and trials that are related to vascular surgery. And this, actually, the next point is something that's ambitious and something we're excited about, is to implement the Agree-2 score for each of the guidelines that will be uploaded. So essentially, the Agree-2 is a tool that allows to assess the quality of the guidelines. And by attributing each guideline a certain score, the user will be able to choose the guideline with the highest quality. Fourth, the user will also be able to compare the different guidelines side by side. Let's take the example of lung cancer screening. You have more than 3 societies that have published their own set of guidelines on lung cancer screening. This might confuse the reader. And so what we'll be doing on the website is that we'll highlight the differences between the 3 guidelines, and the user will also be able to see the quality of each of those guidelines and choose the one with the highest quality. And finally, we'll also provide a summary of guidelines in quick pictures. Now, most guidelines nowadays have an executive summary, but even those tend to be very lengthy. I'd like to thank the team for making this project happen: Dr. Latouf, Dr. Zapata, Dr. Valsankar, Mr. Al-Obaidi, and Mr. Shahab, who couldn't be with us today. Thank you very much.
Dr. Zapata, you're up next.
Hello everyone, my name is David Zapata. I'm a third-year integrated cardiothoracic surgery resident here at Emory. I work with Dr. Latouf. Today I want to talk about next-generation strategies in education from a resident perspective. and I'll focus primarily on surgical education. This can probably be applied to all different types of residency fields, but I think it is most applicable to surgery. So from a historical note, surgery and other aspects of other residencies have been, residents have been trained more in an apprenticeship model, which essentially states that over a number of years, you get more time, you have a progression in your experience with, you get more education and more clinical and operative opportunities as you go along in your training. And I think this is, this model has worked for many years and is continuing to work to some extent. However, with the modern day duty hour restrictions that we have, there has been challenges to this. And you know, the main challenge that the duty hour restrictions have created is that we are trying to train a surgeon to be as good or even better than they were before in a time where there's more knowledge, more education available now than ever before with a restricted amount of time. So having all those things together makes a pretty complex training environment, and one that we need to think about and create unique opportunities and strategies in order to educate our residents. So video education is a method that has been used more and more over the past few years. And it's used to help with surgical knowledge and surgical education. It helps with teaching anatomy and teaching surgical procedures, and then also assessing the skills of your trainees. If you videotape them, you can judge their progress and see how they need to make next steps to improve. And then finally, we can use video for simulation. So it's been used in surgical education in multiple facets already. But I'll talk more about how we can improve on this shortly. So first, I wanted to highlight how not video education is working for us in surgery. This article here is a review that actually is meant to be published. It's set to be published in March of this year. And it focuses on 20 different articles within video education, specifically for surgeons, and the goal of it is to determine different aspects of video education and whether or not it works. So what they focused on in this review article specifically is using video education for learning and improving knowledge, and then using video education for improving performance in surgeons. So for the learning aspect, they used pre and post video questionnaires. So they essentially they showed residents videos, and at the end of the video determined whether or not they had gained more knowledge versus using some other source of education. And then for performance evaluation, they used videos to teach residents how to do surgeries versus other educational aspects such as reading or things like this, and determined whether or not there was a benefit in video education versus others. And in short, what they found is that using video education for training surgical residents did have an increase in learning. They had improved knowledge, improved performance in the operating room, they had better operative times, less adverse events, and were able to complete more tasks on a predetermined checklist. And then finally, the surgeons that underwent video training had a higher amount of satisfaction and confidence after undergoing video training versus reading out of the book or doing some other sort of education method. So in short, this is meant to show that video education in surgery is a useful method and one that we should continue to use. But I think this is something that we can do better in, and I think we can do better in a couple of different ways. First off, video education is primarily used in laparoscopic and arthroscopic surgery, where it's easy to use, it's easy to gather video because you're using a scope in that surgery that has video recording capabilities. In open surgery, however, we have to wear wearable cameras, we have to use a headlight for better exposure. It makes it a little harder to get an adequate view of what you need to view for open surgery. So Dr. Latouf and I are actually working on obtaining wearable cameras for our institution, for our practice, so that we can better record our cardiothoracic surgeries. And then the main thing I want to focus on is local implementation of video recordings. Right now, there's the videos that are available online are largely out. For instance, if you want to learn how to do a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, you can go and go to the SAGE's website, which is a national organization, and view how to do this surgery and learn from a national perspective. You can go to CTS.net and learn how to do a CABG or a valve. But having those videos on a national level, it doesn't necessarily translate to training the trainee. For one, the videos on a national level are more, they're covering mostly rare and unique cases that that are good for, they're good for other attendings to learn how different people around the world do these types of surgeries, but don't necessarily focus on how to do the surgery and how to create the core foundation of education that trainees need to have in order to expand on that. So I think, in short, my point in this talk is that I wanted to encourage the creation of a local video database amongst surgeons at individual institutions in order to better teach our trainees. And I think this will be beneficial for two different reasons. One, as Dr. Latouf mentioned, we talked about video recording and surgeries. And if I have the opportunity to watch a video of him doing surgery, of seeing how he does the surgery, before I get to do the surgery with him, then one, I feel more confident, I feel more prepared to do the surgery with him. And two, he knows that I know his steps. And knowing his steps is almost more important than knowing the steps in themselves. You want to know how the surgery is done, but you also want to know how that person in particular does that surgery. So knowing that, for him, for the attending to know that I know his steps or her steps, that is key and will ultimately allow me as the trainee more opportunity to do more in the case. And that leads to having a greater and more expedited core. You have a better foundation, and you can expand on that further with videos from around the country. It's just taking that step and taking it a step back and starting at your local training base. And then furthermore, having these local videos I think is useful because it will help with meeting local duty hour restrictions and things like this. We have videos we can train at home, and we don't have to worry about abusing the duty hours that are provided to us. So in summary, I want to briefly highlight the 10,000 hour rule created by, or phrased by, coined by Malcolm Gladwell. He states that you have to, essentially the phrase is that you have to spend 10,000 hours of any given topic to become an expert at that. And I think that has met a fair deal of scrutiny, but I think it's important. It's still an important phrase to some extent in careers that have a certain procedure and procedural steps and some monotony within them. And surgery has both procedures and has a dynamic mindset. But at the end of the day, in surgery, you have to put the time in to become a surgeon. You have to put the time in to be good at this craft. And with the duty hour restrictions, it's harder to do that. So creating a video education database would be helpful to continue education from home and also allow us to have an expedited creation of our core foundation so that we can expand on that further in training. That's it for that. And then I just wanted to highlight one other point. Mohammed greatly brought up the guideline scars that we've been working on. This is just one aspect of it, one that I helped co-create. It's a seminal papers. It covers some of our most cited cardiothoracic surgery papers. And it's important because it'll highlight some of the papers that we learned from and learn how to practice this, practice within this field. And then we created summaries under each of these papers to highlight some of the key points in each of the most cited papers. So that is it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, David. I'm glad he quoted Malcolm Gladwell. He's one of my favorite authors. And the 10,000 hour rule is interesting. And I have to say, after having been at Emory for the last 6 months or so, if that was the case, by the time we finished the cardiothoracic surgery fellowship here, we'd been expert 3 times over. The number of hours we put in. My name is Nakul. I'm one of the cardiothoracic surgery fellows here. I completed my general surgery education at Indiana University. And I wanted to highlight a small project that started off as a side hobby almost, and has grown into something a little bit bigger. I have no financial disclosures, although I wish I did. So, new concepts in surgical education. Over the last couple of sessions, we've heard a lot about creating online portals or creating an online web presence or a repository of data and information that can be easily accessed, but also that builds up quickly, is almost crowdsourced and crowdfunded, and is freely available to all. It so happens that at Indiana, we had such a similar idea a few years back when I was in my research break, and we created such a website. And some of the things that we thought about were that, one, we obviously had a need for online education. We wanted to use a web-based, video-based curriculum because it's easier to get, and clearly, as David showed, there's data that suggests that retention is better when you have videos. We wanted this idea to expand from just a simple collection of videos into something bigger, sort of like what YouTube did, starting with just a collection of home uploaded videos in 2006 to now that provides television services as well. We wanted to measure something. I forget who said this, but somebody once told me, always measure things in your life. If you can measure it, then you can improve it. And so we wanted some data element to this video collection. And then eventually, as all academics go, we wanted to transition this into a grant. And so we were able to create this repository. And here at Emory, when Dr. Latouf mentioned this idea, I've been very privileged to become a part of this project here and try and help with it. So the identification of a need. Clearly, surgery is a complex field. And simply reading a textbook and showing up to the operating room and hoping to be able to understand the anatomy, as well as the steps in anticipating problems, is simply not acceptable anymore. If you think about it, for example, pilot training. My dad was in the Air Force, and pilots have changed the way they train from World War I up until now, where they're in simulators with horizon projectors and all these complex tools, whereas surgeons have not really changed the way we train. I would say that the way Dr. Ellis Jones here, famous cardiac surgeon, trained Dr. Latouf is probably similar to how he trains us in the operating room. And it's a time-honored tradition. It's something that's worked, but we need to begin to anticipate change. I've been in surgical training for about a decade, and when I see surgeons who trained me, and when I see junior residents who are 5 to 10 years behind me in training, I see that there's a huge generational difference. And I can anticipate that we need to bridge this gap, otherwise the knowledge we've accrued so far may not be effectively translated going down. So when we look at learning and YouTube and video-based curriculum, I learn a lot of things on YouTube. I play the guitar, and so I wanted to learn how to play the piano, and I pulled up YouTube and started playing chords. If I want to change the oil in my car, I pull up YouTube and I can now do it myself. So why not video-based curriculum for surgery? One of my professors, when I was at MGH doing a research block, Dr. David Dragner, he said, believe about 30% of the things that they put in textbooks. Why? Because by the time the textbook gets published, most of that data is outdated. And so there's a need for something that is rapidly available, quickly changes, and can keep up with the advances that come about. It has to be peer-reviewed, so everybody has to agree on it. We can't just have one person's opinion on there, or a small group's opinion on there, and expect it to carry forward everywhere. For example, the management of complicated gallbladder disease may not be the same in India as it is here. Resources are different, and the surgical techniques can sometimes, and approaches can be different as well. And the third thing is, it has to be end-user reviewed. Sometimes what a well-trained attending cardiac surgeon might think as a very simple operation and something that should make complete and total sense might not make any sense to a first-year cardiac resident. And so I think it has to be reviewed by the people who are going to be using these videos ultimately. So we started with putting together videos on this one website. We called it the Surgical Procedure Portal Support. And all we did was, I know a little bit of Java and HTML, so I combined that with $18 a year in WordPress charges, the online blog site, and added a .org at the end of it, and gave it to general surgery residents to upload videos. And very quickly, within the span of about 6 to 8 months, we accrued about 800 videos. And each of these were reviewed by senior level surgical residents and surgical faculty members at Indiana. So they're all authorized. They weren't just randomly picked out. We started simple. So we added a single section on how to suture, how to tie a tie around a simple ligature, how to tie around a vascular clamp, how to fire a simple stapler. and we started adding sections in different topics and different sections. And eventually we ended up with a pretty big website and about 30 odd sections, and we put it online. Now, I just checked this morning, and Indiana has about 300 medical students they graduate a year. This website has about 7,000 hits. So clearly it's being used very effectively. I have a QR code up there for this website, so those people who have a QR reader on their smartphones can quickly get a picture of it to be able to browse this at your convenience later. So while you guys are scanning that QR code, I'll tell you a little bit more. The data element of it was particularly important because just putting up a website online and expecting it to work is unrealistic. We want to see if people are using it, and if they do use it, are there certain sections or certain videos that people like more, or do they like the entire course, or do they think it's completely useless? So that's where the next part of this came in, and that's called RedCap. Now before we get into RedCap, remember, if you ever do something, it's important to publish it and talk about it so it's accessible to people and people get to it. So we added meta tags. Meta tags are what Google uses to be able to identify websites and put it up when you do a Google search. So with these meta tags, I have had this website go up to 2nd rank on Google. So if you do a search for surgical video database, this comes up as rank 2. And web search, which says it's the world's #1 minimally invasive surgical website, comes in at rank 3. So the measurement part of it. Every video has a short form that's linked to it. It's based on a system called RedCap that you guys can read about a little bit later. But RedCap allows you to capture all this data and create an online database. It's secure, it's protected, password protected, and it's, I believe, 128-bit encrypted. So we used a Likert scale to identify what people thought of the individual video. And we said, why would you stop at the video? So we had a follow-up survey for the entire course. And then depending on your level of training as a medical student or as a resident, the questions change. So the data normalizes for your level of training so we can be a little bit more sophisticated in our analysis. So we had a whole lot of questions that I designed with a number of people. Now eventually, what we'd like to think about, and what we're in the process of doing is, take for example, cardiac surgery. Very important to be highly efficient. Everybody's always yelling and screaming in the operating room to save minutes, because cross-clamp time and ischemia time and cardiopulmonary bypass time define the patient's outcome. So if you have young trainees, wouldn't it be great for them to be able to look at some of these videos beforehand and be very clear about the steps as opposed to just word or mouth or text? And if we could measure a change in operating room efficiency because of this, and we show these videos to scrub techs, we could potentially write a grant for something like AHRQ. And AHRQ is the organization that identifies and increases efficiency in healthcare. So this is how I like to think about a simple educational idea that spins into something bigger by measuring data that you can get to it, and then eventually trying to spin it off into a grant. And so this transitioned me to the project here at Emory, which Dr. Latouf and his team created. They've kindly invited me to be a part of, where we have a website that has trials and guidelines and seminal papers. It's a beautifully organized website with very clear sections, excellent sections on trials and seminal papers. And for somebody like me who's finished my general surgical training and is just beginning cardiothoracic training, it's a gold mine of information for me to be able to quickly go through. In the processes from Indiana, if I compare, I think we've completed the first 2 steps. And now we have an ability to expand this idea, to measure what we can, and then transition it to a grant. So thank you very much, Dr. Latouf, for including me in this idea. Obviously, there's so many different possibilities that we can go into. This is Indiana and Indiana University. It's been a very instrumental part of my training, and I look forward to my time here at Emory. Thank you very much.
Muhammad, David, and Nakul has really challenged me with the ideas that they have put forward, and I want to open it for you to ask any questions, and I will follow. Mr. Sabah.
I've got a question when it comes into legal issues, when it comes into the operating rooms. I know in today's world, there's a lot of incidents that happens that took the institution, neither to say the private hospitals, to litigation. And these videos becomes actually a big evidence for on this side, and we all know on the operating room there's a lot of things you could do. It could be spontaneous because of your trainings or because of the incident itself. It could be compromised on the legal terms later on to trying to defend you why you've done it. Have you explored, or any of people that you work with on this, putting this together from the legality standpoint, all these videos are on your side, against you, or they're neutral when it comes into putting these procedures to perspective?
I think that's a great point. To be perfectly honest with you, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. But in my mind, it's just like a textbook. On the back of every textbook or every medical manual, there's a very clear warning that says that use your best medical judgment. These are only a collection of guidelines or tools to help you solve a clinical problem. And I think that the same sort of situation applies to these videos. Now, a lot of these videos are sourced from reputable sources, so they're not homemade videos on YouTube. A lot of them are published, peer-reviewed and published, so a lot of them come from the New England Journal of Medicine or the AJCC, or a lot of them are well documented and peer-reviewed. So my guess would be if we put up a disclaimer on the first page that says you agree to proceed only if you say that your judgment is your judgment, and you can't use the videos as some sort of substituted judgment, I think that would be the way to go about it. But ultimately, it does happen that in the operating room, the overall responsibility for the conduct as well as the outcome rests on the attending surgeon. And so I think that's where I would say things would lie. Dr. Latouf?
Yeah. I will make a quick comment on that. We are intentionally focused on disclosing any negative events that may happen in the operating room, whether they are recorded or not, to the patient and his or her family in advance. We believe that disclosing negative events is far safer than trying to cover them up and discover later. We have identified that disclosure, full disclosure to the patient and his or her family, is the safest and best way. Dr. Khaldi.
Yeah, just based on this, complications in other surgeries, a lot of the societies that have complications videos, they cannot be used in courts, and they, for example, interop bleeding. And those videos are used for education, but not for, cannot be used for legal, courts. So just FYI, those videos are shared all the time, especially in the field of neurosurgery. It's a big deal. In Indiana, there's quite a few videos about complications. So I think we have to kind of distinguish those two. And I don't know what legality. I'm not a lawyer, but those are very common videos.
So I want to congratulate the group on the effort, and can you please give us a historical background as to why the government guidelines, were discontinued, or in 25 words or less?
Well, if you go to the AHRQ website, the reason is very vague, and there is a lot of speculation and rumors as to why it has been taken down. And it's commonly believed that it's because of the huge amount of resources that is required to maintain such a website. However, you have other agencies that are not government funded, third parties from NGOs and, for example, the WHO. They are attempting to create something that's even remotely similar to the NGC, something that will not rely on government budget and spending.
We have a particular procedure in the guidelines cite, for instance, on intubation or whatever the guidelines were on a topic. Were there multiple people putting multiple sets of guidelines for the same thing, or did they sort through them and end up with one set for a particular issue on the guidelines.gov?
The guidelines.gov contained over 5,500 guidelines,
right,
and it was very wide-based, and they did overlap. Yeah. And that's one of the issues that Muhammad and his team are trying to be focused on. As we approach closing time, we have literally 1 minute before we go to lunch, and you all are invited to lunch, and we'll come back to 2 great sessions afterwards. I want to comment on my outstanding colleagues on what they have done so far. And I don't expect you to answer that, but perhaps we can discuss that over lunch. Mohammed, you're at the American University of Beirut. You're going to Mass General Hospital for the next 2 years. David and Nicole are in Atlanta. We have colleagues from Ohio. How is the ownership of guidelines.gov going to be? Is that going to be a multi-institutional, a single institution, or is that a private initiative? I don't expect an answer from you, but I raise that as a question that we all have to deal with. The second, David, you brought the issue of video education, very important, good question. And we heard from Dr. Nazal about the outstanding simulation center that they have. Is there an opportunity to tie the simulation center with a video center? Are these two things, two horses running in the same direction or not? And Nicole, you have created a success story in general surgery. Is it time to replay that in cardiothoracic surgery? Our time is up. You all are welcome for lunch. We can continue this conversation.
What you might find I'm going to remind you of, and some of the information I'm going to share with you in the next 30 minutes could be life-changing if you take it to heart. And talk about the number of different areas where we can actually explode our personal productivity, explode our energy, slow down the aging process, and actually reverse it if you're in the mood. Everyone in the mood? Yeah. Okay, I like that. So it is time. I think there's never been a better time. When you talk about disruptions in healthcare, I think a big part of that is just being the product. You have to be the messenger. You really have to embrace it. And then when patients see you, or students see you, or your family sees you, they really get an idea that they've arrived at the right location. So everyone up. Just going to do a little stretch here. Okay, so what we're going to do is, many of us, we know a lot of things, right? We're very smart. We can Google anything we want to. But a big part of what I do is application. And a lot of us know a lot of things. But like Buddha say, if you want to put more tea in a cup that's full, the only way to get more tea in the cup is if you empty out the cup, or empty out some to let new tea in. So I invite you to use your breath as a metaphor for letting in the new and out the old. Okay? So take a small inhale and a small exhale. And I want you now to just put your hands gently in front of you and take a big slow inhale all the way up to the top, all the way up to the top. And then press your palms together and exhale. Exhale all the way down, all the way down. Interlock your fingers when you're in front of your heart that starts beating 5 weeks after conception. Press your hands all the way down, all the way down. And now a bigger, slower inhale. To inhale everything you want to become more of. And inhale life and energy. Inhale all the way up to the top. And then press your palms together. You can close your eyes if you like. If you have trust issues, keep them open. And exhale all the way down, all the way down, all the way down. And interlock your fingers and then come down even further, all the way down to the bottom. Let's do a big slower inhale now for the third time, and a big slow inhale. So for 7, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Put your palms together and exhale. Exhale. Exhale all the way out. And interlock your fingers and come all the way down, all the way down, all the way down, all the way down. And now close your eyes. Close your eyes. Just get a feel for the sense of being still and the permanency of standing still, but it's an illusion because the Earth is traveling at 1,000 miles an hour. We're actually traveling around the sun at thousands of miles an hour, and our solar system is traveling through the Milky Way at thousands of miles an hour, so it's really quite an illusion. But standing here, I want you to get a sense of just not putting more information into your mind, because Sir Francis Bacon was only half right when he said knowledge is power. Until you use it, or until you teach someone what you've just known, it's really only for entertainment purposes. So in the next 24 hours, if I remind you of something that you know already, or something that you want to act on, or something totally new, I want you to take action on it. So all in favor of taking action in the next 24 hours of something that you learn from me in the next 30 minutes, say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carried. Open up your eyes. Have a seat. Feeling good. Okay. So let me give you an idea how quick this works. You know, it's I only have 30 minutes with you, but I'm on a show about every month for 5 minutes. It's called Hamilton Life. I was on the show for the first time, and Greg saw me, and he's 26, and he said, "You know what's most annoying about you, Uchi?" He goes, "I'm 26, you're 52. What's your secret?" And I said, I have many things that I do. I have a whole tool chest of things that I do. And he goes, no, what is it? I said, well, it's food. He goes, give me your diet. I said, no, I'm not going to give you your diet. He goes, this is your exercise program? I said, maybe. He said, give me your workout. I said, no. He said, what else could be? I said, I sleep healthy. I said, your immune system's on standby during the day. When you sleep is when the body grows and where you integrate emotion and you process memories. He goes, what do I wear at nighttime? A CPAP? I said, no, I'm not going to tell you that. And he said, tell me. I said, no, it's how I feel about sleep. It's how I feel about food. It's how I feel about water. It's how I feel about movement. It's a philosophy. It's not so much you can Google anything you want, but you have access to all the information that can get your stomach flat. But I said, until you vibrate with one of your 110 trillion cells, nothing's going to happen. He goes, I get that. Give me your diet. I said, no. I said, Greg, I'm on the show 5 minutes. I'll be up on the show every month for 5 minutes. In 6 months, you'll get an idea. Well, let me give an idea. I didn't actually train him. He didn't actually get my diet. Let me show you him 6 months later. Let's give an idea of what happens when you go simply from knowing to actually making the journey of 1,000 miles, which is basically from knowing to feeling, to getting your gut flora involved, and then you start really enjoying it. And the annoying thing for me is, he didn't even buy my book, for crying out loud, okay? So you don't really need more information. What you basically have to do is just act on what you know. Act on what you know, and it's amazing where it can take you. Okay, so energy. A big part of creating a better impact is using all the energy inside you. They said many of us actually, when you go about your everyday, we use about 10% of our muscles. If you exercise, if you're one of the 5% of the population who exercise, you will actually use 50% of your muscles. But there are people though who access 90% of the muscles, and mainly it's a mind-muscle connection. But when you have energy, when you use 600 muscles and the 206 bones and the 360 joints, it's amazing what you can tap into. And you become ageless, literally ageless. You think of Beyonce, 30, Tina Turner, 60, twice their age, they look the same age. I don't go by age, I go by energy, because energy is basically currency, it's coin, it's reserve in your bank account. And the best way to build energy is not by sitting down and resting, it's by movement. Movement begets energy, and that's life in motion. Okay. So when I think of people who've gone through history and made a mark, it's really people who are energized, right? Do you believe that Elvis has energy? For sure. But if you misuse your energy and spend it wrong, it's amazing how you can end up looking at 42. When I think of people, though, who've gone down in history, or people who have a high energy, would you say Jack LaLanne has high energy? High energy? How about Nelson Mandela? If you want to move the world, you really have to tap into those 110 trillion cells. And you've got to tap into the 600 muscles in your body, the 206 bones, the 360 joints. And only then amazing things can happen. Sting's 68 years of age. Unbelievable. Look at the biceps in this guy, 68. Put an 18-year-old to shame. So if you want to play a bigger game, and you want to be on a bigger platform, you make fun of Justin Bieber, but at 23, he sees himself in the same way you see him, and that's how he really is. And at that point, when you intersect those three, you become unstoppable. And to play on a worldwide level, to go from busking in front of a subway in 2009 to be worth $400 million, not that financial is where it's at, but to give you an idea, if you increase your energy, how you will actually tap into things unbeknownst to people through the ages. Everyone take a deep breath in. And let it out. Add more texture to the day. You make fun of Tom Cruise jumping on the couch, but he's worth $500 million. I would jump on a few couches. He was asked, how do you feel about your new love of your life? And he said, I love her. We made fun of him. But I heard from Deepak Chopra, a psychoneuroimmunologist, and he said that if you judge someone, you create a bigger gap between what you are and where you want to be. So I embrace and compliment Tom Cruise. I enjoy his energy. I don't have to enjoy everything about him. But I enjoy his energy and what he brings to the world. And guess what? It means I've actually closed the gap between where I want to be and where I am right now. Everyone take a deep breath in. And let it out. So when I look at the reasons why I'm tapping into energy, mitochondria is like my favorite organelle in the body. What does mitochondria make? ATP. It makes ATP, about 147 pounds a day. Who has lots of energy? The 3-year-old or the 73-year-old? Who has more energy? The 3-year-old. Naturally, they run around the barbecue, they jump all over the place, we take pictures of them, we want to watch them what they're doing, then we slow down and we don't do anything. Well, they've actually shown, this is Michael Kogan, he said by age 60, if you're not a regular exerciser, your mitochondria actually turn off. And one of the reasons why we have that slowness post-55, and slowness post-60, is because they're not moving. If you don't use it, you lose it. But the neat thing about mitochondria, though, they respond epigenetically. So if you start exercising, if you start lifting weights, which is only 1% of the population, if you start exercising, which is about 5% of the population, you can epigenetically turn back on the mitochondria and regain that youth. And that's what you can tap into, that 95% of us do not tap into. And we think coffee is just as good, or Red Bull, or or Monster. Meanwhile, you can tap into that energy, and then you can bring more to the table and be more of everything you wanted, right? Because I said, energy is currency, it's coin, it's cash, right? It's your legacy. So when I think of our office, this is our office here, and you can see how we have a little chin-up bar at the end, and people often wonder, as patients wander through, and they say, what the heck is that bar up there? And I said, that's where we do our extractions. Okay, so, but unbeknownst to them though, in 2005, I heard Dr. Oz say that the biggest organ in the body is the skin, at about 10% of the body weight. But me though, in 2012, and because I'm certified as a trainer with the National College of Sports Association, I get all these neat exercise scientific journals, and they're actually now saying they've identified muscle as the biggest organ in the body, but almost half of the body weight. Muscle is the biggest organ in the body. It releases hundreds of myokines. Whenever you move, it releases myokines, BDNF, interleukin 6, interleukin 4, interleukin 10. And what it does is it has an effect on the body that tells every one of your cells and your organs that it's alive. And it's called myokines, releasing hundreds of myokines. So we all know that exercise is good for us. Does everyone know exercise is good for us? Everyone here would agree. But when I ask, do you exercise? It's amazing when people actually just don't go. When you think of some of the reasons. What are some of the reasons why people don't exercise out of curiosity? Tired. Yeah. Meanwhile, though, exercise actually, if I'm tired at the end of my day, and instead of going home, I carry my carcass into the gym. And meanwhile, I know the science. I don't want to go to the gym. I get on the treadmill. I start moving, thinking, okay, I'll just give myself permission to do 5 minutes. 10 minutes later, endorphins are flooding, serotonin, and I am there. And then I go home, and I have a second wind. Not a second wind, but a second wind now I can actually enjoy with my family. Now they get all of me, because I give everything to my patients. And do not they deserve the same energy and what I bring to the table? I work so hard for my family, everything at the office. And I come home, I'm just dragging my carcass in the door. And the family who I say I do all this for gets leftovers. Well, if you don't give your family leftovers, one way to do it is to tap into that second wind and get that energy. Let's go. When I think of mitochondrial breakdown, there's the theories of aging about how mitochondria, as we get older, start breaking down and they have oxidative stress. But certain foods, Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. They've actually shown that ergothioneine, an amino acid, actually the most potent source of it in our diet is mushrooms. And mushrooms actually, it gives the body ergothioneine. It purges free radicals from the bone marrow, from the liver, from the lens of the eye, and the mitochondria. As soon as I learned that, it doesn't take me long to act on things from the science. I started eating mushrooms 3-4 times a week. Shiitake, cremini, bell, I just use them. So everything I'm sharing with you, I use. I would not give you things that I don't use, but mushrooms are amazing, absolutely incredible. They're thinking of making another vitamin. The last vitamin was coined or termed in 1948, it was B12. So to give you an idea what's possible with food. Okay. So I think of Oracle here, and I'm thinking of how to increase my energy and my pull. Mental ability often declines with age. 5-year-olds have Alzheimer's. It's a disease of mental decline and memory loss. Some of age-related as we get older. We've actually shown that physical activity has the ability to turn back on neurons that have turned off. Erickson and Page, neuroscientists, they've actually shown when they first discovered stem cells in the hippocampus in the human brain, they actually realized that one of the best ways to encourage stem cell growth in your brain is to exercise. One way to extend the lifespan of neurons is to keep a novel environment and don't keep doing the same things every Friday. Pizza on Saturday, Kentucky Fried Chicken on Sunday, the same restaurant on Wednesday, the same resort on Friday. Put in the same belt because it's Thursday. It's my Thursday belt. The worst thing we could do, because the brain gets bored to sleep by routine. So one of the best ways then to keep your brain young and healthy is actually to exercise, to increase stem cell growth, the baby, virgin stem cells of the brain. And the other one is just to have novel environments. Don't always wear the blue tie. Change the red sweater. Okay. Take a deep breath in. And let it out. Like all these, I'm so infatuated with muscle. It's the biggest organ in the body. They talk about it almost being half our body weight. So fibroblast growth factors too that make strong bones. Interleukin 15 and interleukin 6 that helps with belly fat metabolism. Interleukin 4, interleukin 10. Tumor growth factor beta, which is an anti-inflammatory. Incredible. And this is all released not when you're sitting, when you're standing. Everyone up. I'll give you the benefit of this. So what I'm going to do is just wake you up. It's a little afternoon. We've all eaten. Lucky the food is amazing. Thanks to Dr. Latif. They're salmon and invigorating my mind. DHA in salmon. Decahexanoic acid has 500 functions in the brain, 500 functions. And I had my salmon at lunchtime, so I was very happy. So bring your shoulders and bring them forward and just bring up and increase the blood flow to your brain and bring your shoulders backwards. Yeah, I want you in a big giant circle now. Just take your left hand and bring it in a circle and come forward all the way. So enjoy that movement, a little childlike movement in there. Get those mitochondria going. Stop. And take your right hand and bring it backwards. Waking up the other part of your brain. Now with that hand going backwards, I want you to keep the other hand and go forwards. Now you have one hand going backwards and the other forward. Kids have an easy time with this. If you're swimming, that's not good. This is not good. One hand go back. Now reverse it. Reverse it. If you have an easy time, it means your brain is on track. If you're having a hard time, that's not good. That's not good. Okay, have a seat, feeling good. Have a seat, feeling good. Have a seat, feeling good. Have a seat. So, on an airplane, when I said in the event of an emergency and the cabin is depressurizing, right? We all have people that depend on us. They said it's the wrong thing to do what? If you're traveling with someone who depends on you, the oxygen mask come down. Our first intuitive nature is to what? Put the oxygen mask on who first? The spouse, the baby. Wrong. You need to put it on who's first? If people depend on you, if you have patients, if you have a spouse, if you have elderly parents, if you have children, you know, you cannot take care of them first. It seems so noble, but it's such a stupid idea. You really got to take care of yourself first. Put the oxygen mask on you first. It goes against everything we've learned, like selfless nature as a physician, selfless mom and selfless father. Take care of myself first. My wife always tells the kids, she goes, look, your kids, mom's going to the gym, and then the kids go, Mom, don't go to the gym, don't go to the gym. She goes, you know, a strong mom is a good mom. And the kids go, yes, Mom. Dad, when are you going to the gym? You know, so that's my next question. So I would think sometimes we know enough of the hows, like there's enough hows on Google, there's how, you can go look anywhere and find the hows. However, what's your why? Like, what is your why? You know, but when Nietzsche said, when the why is big enough, the how comes along. So I'm half a century old. I have a 3-year-old, little Theo. People say, is he yours? Yeah, he's mine. Okay, half a century old. My daughter, 9, Kylie. You know, it's also a good thing to know more about fitness and learn all the terminologies, because when patients ask you questions, you got to know. If patients ask you about probiotics, and you go, there's not very good science in it, you're behind the 8 ball. You know, nutritionists, and they're talking about the new information about the human microbiome is probiotics are live flora that can help create stability and diversity in the human microbiome. You know, the National Institute of Health in 2012, with the first phase of the Human Microbiome Project, they said what's happening is that what they've learned about the microbiome, because you have your health up here and you have genes here, everyone admits that your genes impact your health. What they're now saying with the first phase of the Human Microbiome Project is that your microbiome impacts your health as much as your genes do. This is mind-blowing. Your health is impacted by your genes, everyone knows, but your microbiome is impacting your health as much as your genes do. They're saying what they learned in that first phase is shaking the foundation of medicine and shaking the foundation of nutrition. The number one way you can actually change your microbiome, which is pretty important when you think about what I've just said now, is to change the way you eat. Changing the way you eat is the biggest impact on your microbiome. And we all eat every day. And I'm thinking now, Hippocrates is going, finally they get it. You know, 2,300 years later, right? Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. 300 BC he said that. Now we know. My mom was the first person to marry, 5'2", 210 pounds. She fed us cod liver oil. Anyone here grew up with fish oil or cod liver oil growing up? We had 4 children. My mom fed us with this big silver spoon. It had some dents in it because the same silver spoon she used to beat us with, okay? So I have some mixed emotion when it comes time to nutrition. But now to this day, guess what's in my kitchen? How I was raised. Fish oil. Better tasting fish oil, citrus tasting, but my kids are getting the fish oil. So when I look at Simon Sinek, and he just kind of look at your why. What is your why? You know, besides I want to look good for Facebook. I want to look good for Instagram. I want to, you know, I have a 30-year college reunion. A bigger one is what's your profound why? What is your why? You know, Smart Money magazine in March 2006 said there's 5 steps to becoming a millionaire. It wasn't a financial magazine. It was 5 steps to becoming a millionaire. You know what the first step was? Get healthy. Wasn't pay off debt. Wasn't look at your 401k. It wasn't pay off, get a new credit line, look at your bank advisor. It was get healthy. Powerful in a financial magazine. So I look at something like little Theo. My little Theo here just dancing away. I'm thinking he's 3 now. But you know, in my 50s, how old will I be? Will I be able to teach him how to drive? Until a smart aleck last week in Boston said, in 13 years they'll be driverless cars, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. So I got to pick up my own reason. So I want you to close your eyes. Just close your eyes. And I want you to think of, close your eyes, I want you to think of your own personal reason. What's your reason why you might want to start an exercise program, or why you need to start taking care of yourself? Like, what is your biggest reason? What's challenging you? Is it some memory loss? Is it a sore back? Is it a chronic illness that's not going away? Who are you looking after? Who depends on you? With your eyes closed, I want you actually to inhale that reason. It's one of the most intimate things we do is inhale. And inhale the reason. Let it flood all 110 trillion cells. And open your eyes. It's neat. So second one of in my tool chest is sleep. I used to think, sleep was, you'd sleep when you die. And it was so macho. We brag about how little, I need 3 hours, I need 2 hours. I can go 2 nights without sleep. Then I heard some exercise scientists say that unless you're getting 7 to 9 hours a night, and guess unless you're getting, the sleep happens in 90-minute cycles, unless you're getting 4 to 6 full minute cycles a night, your brain is not able to process everything you've learned during the day. Like right now, during the day, we have 100 billion neurons. They're all speaking with each other, new synapses are happening, they're talking to each other. It's like going shopping at Nordstrom's and shopping all day, throwing it on the bed, going back out shopping, throwing it on the bed, going back out and shopping again. Your hotel room looks like a mess. So most of our minds look like a mess because we're taking all this new information in and nothing gets sorted out. At night time is when the sorting comes out. And then I heard a great analogy. Just like Michael Nergard from University of Copenhagen. This is interesting. Neuroscientist, he said the neurons actually shrink up to 40%. What happens is it makes it way for the lymphatic system to remove free radicals and toxins and help cleanse the brain. So if someone's only sleeping 3 hours compared to 8 hours, the 8-hour person has more debris removed from their brain, and you get better processing, more mental clarity, better memory, hippocampus.